It is a little after 7 o'clock, 7:04. We're going to start the meeting with first, everyone stand and please pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We're going to jump right away into, because I promised, the presentation of the 5-year forecast, as well as first, though, Mr. Mailer, would you please introduce your relatively new, two new hires, who I've met a few times now?
The opportunity. Well, first of all, I appreciate the opportunity to be here as we start another fun and exciting budget season, so I'm happy to do that. I'm joined by two of our newest staff members. Very, very excited about some of the changes that happened at Town Hall. You may be aware that the assistant town manager retired back in September. Around the same time, we had the community economic development director also decide to return to the private sector, and with that really had two openings. So we always say when we go to hire people that we would love the benefit of hiring the last two candidates, because they in some combination represent everything we want. And in this particular case, was actually able to hire the top two candidates for the job and get really more than we could have ever imagined in two highly skilled people. So Denise Casey, who's to my right, is the assistant town manager. Denise's experience is extensive on any number of fronts: community services, human resources, certainly has a lot of experience in that regard. Has most recently served as the assistant town manager in the town of Wilmington. Previously worked for the town of Lexington in the HR capacity. Is known throughout the state as the sort of go-to person on those things which are human resources, and in our world, with things like collective bargaining and civil service and all the things that go with that, that's an extremely important asset. We've reorganized that Denise Casey will take on the responsibility of the Community Services Division. So under that division will be Senior Center, Council on Aging, Veterans, Library, Youth Center, and Human Resources. So Kathy Dobby will report to Denise as part of that. And our Community Services person, Deanna Cruz, will also work in conjunction with Denise's office. So all of our Community Services function will work under Denise's division. On my left is Megan Jopp, who's the Deputy Town Manager, who will take on the responsibility of the Community and Economic Development Division as well. She'll serve as a Deputy Town Manager and take on those responsibilities. Those areas, as you may recall, include the Building Department, Health, Planning, Conservation. So those areas that impact businesses. Megan has hit the ground running, as Denise has as well. Megan's very involved in dealing with our new initiatives that are associated with trying to get businesses back up and operating, post-gas disaster. So those plans that you've seen out there, those gift card initiatives, have come out of Megan's office. Her ideas, coordinating that, committing the resources to do some things that we don't typically do in municipal government. We're not often in the gift card distribution business, and we're learning quite a bit about doing that. So she's been centered around that particular initiative and has again hit the ground running and allowed us to feel really good that we're supporting those businesses that have been impacted. I think at last count, there was more than 500 people who had participated in the program. I think that number will grow to 600 or 700. We think in the end there'll be north of $200,000 invested by people, North Andover residents, and others outside of North Andover in those impacted businesses, which is great. And if you want, I'm sure Megan can give you an update on sort of phase 2 of that program and other things that she has in mind as it relates to sort of reinvigorating the business community as a result of that. Denise has been very involved in another program. So Columbia Gas also set aside $10 million for residents for non-claims related items. And Denise is involved with what's called the ECCF, the Essex County Charitable Foundation, and the Greater Lawrence Disaster Relief Fund, and making sure that North Andover residents have access to those dollars. It's a very light application process, but gives them the ability to provide some gap funding if a claims, for some reason the claims process isn't working for you, or there's a timeline issue, a cash flow issue associated with the claim. So both in the last month have become intimately involved in all things gas disaster, and we Sad to say that we'll be involved in gas-related activities at some level or another, I'd expect, for the next 12 months anyway. It has occupied most of the time of most of the senior staff and will continue to occupy a significant amount of our time over the next 12 months or so. So that's these folks. Great to have them.
Welcome.
Thank you.
It's great. So we keep on throwing more stuff at them, and they haven't left yet, so it's a good sign.
You want to run into any questions for our two guests? No? Let's do the 5-year floor. Oops, sorry.
You did. Very nice.
I saw that.
It's good.
I'm sorry.
It's very nice.
Did you get your stove in?
I'll be quiet. Yes, it's been 3 months. We've had.
So is the slow cooker being put away?
Yeah, maybe. You know what is those little grill things? Oh, they're just
It's old.
yeah, very quickly.
Yes.
Anyway.
Well, there will be a press conference tomorrow with a formal announcement that Phase 1 is complete. There are less than 200 homes of the 10,000 that are not currently without heat and hot water, and those are almost exclusively self-mitigators, folks who have decided to work with their own plumbers. In each case that Columbia Gas has been involved in a solution, all of those are done. And so we're reaching the substantially complete. We're basically been at the substantially complete phase for more than a week. Formal announcement will come on that tomorrow, and then we'll get into the other sort of details of other things that relate to that. Any questions about Columbia Gas stuff before we get to? Yeah.
Somewhat on finance committee related.
It's
but,
related.
So then, at what point does Columbia Gas begin the replacement phase? Like for the things that they repaired, are they waiting till the weather changes, or are they going to start trying to do that throughout the winter?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the original expectation when we agreed, when I'm using the term we, I mean both the town and the chief executives of Lawrence and Andover. So usually when I'm using we, these are all been group discussions. They're not been one community at a time, which has been a real positive sort of advent. Our relationship is stronger than it ever has been, and I think that that's a sort of positive outcome to a bad event. With that being said, the original plan was when we shifted, the expectation was everything would be replaced by November 19th.
Right.
And then somewhere along the bumpy road, we realized it was really bumpy and that wasn't going to happen. They thought initially by switching to repair, not replace, that 70% of the work they would do would be repairs and 30% replace. The actual results of what they've done to get to substantial completion is that 82% have been replaced and only 18% have been repaired, leaving a very small population of folks, I think about 1,000, that need to be replaced. Those will begin in the spring. So beginning around April, no later than September, because they need time. Most of those are fairly complicated circumstances. All has to be brought up to code. The expectation is that they will work over the winter, develop a very specific plan, scheduling, some of the things were real issues, begin that installation beginning in April and be no later than September 15th for everybody that's in that small population of folks.
What about road replacements? Are they working over the winter to create a schedule, and do they have an estimated time frame? And I guess the follow-up to that would be, what financial impact does that have on North Andover, if any, and do we have to fund that up front, or do we not know those answers yet? Next step.
That's about a 4-hour response, but I'll try to I'll try to have the response. So we have hired our own consultants, and again, when I say we, all 3 communities have hired the same consultant. One to oversee the construction project to make sure that our subsurface assets were protected. Because when you're going that fast and replacing gas mains, you're tipping water mains, you're touching drain lines. You want to make sure that your assets are not damaged. So we hired a third-party consultant to review that work. That's been complete. We've hired the same consultant to do an analysis of all the roads. They've estimated the cost to be, plus or minus a few dollars, about $150 million to do the full curb-to-curb replacement of all the streets impacted in all 3 communities. That includes the necessary curb work, any code upgrade that may be necessary because we're in the street, not much street light impact, replacing street trees, all that. It's a pretty substantial number. We've provided that estimate to Columbia Gas, and we've begun initial discussions on what that means. Our perspective, obviously, is that although the DPU regulations say that utilities only need to trench repave when replacing gas mains, the actual results of what they've done to get to substantial completion is that 70% of the work they would do would be repairs and 30% replace. The actual results of what they've done to get to substantial completion is that 70% of the work they would do would be repairs and 30% replace. The actual results of what they've done to get to substantial completion is that 70% of the work they would do would be repairs and 30% replace. The actual results of what they've done to get to substantial completion is that 70% of the work they would do would be repairs and 30% replace. The actual results of what they've done to get to substantial completion is that 70% of the work they would do would be repairs and 30% replace. The actual results of what they've done to get to substantial completion is that 70% of the work they would do would be repairs and 30% replace. The actual results of what they've done to get to substantial completion is that 70% of the work they would do would be repairs and 30% replace. The actual results of what they've done that the difference with this project is the sheer impact on and density of all the road impact and the nature of the equipment and everything else makes this different, and they should go beyond the regulatory requirement. The state is aware of our position, has been working with us to try to include in what's called the DPU order language which would mandate that. What we're trying to navigate is coming up with the exact number. You know, I'm sure they're going to want to look at that number and bring to bear their particular resources to decide whether they agree with the sort of all the criteria that makes up a pretty substantial bid. And with that, what will be funded and how it will be funded. So which portion of the roadway is insurance versus which hits rates, which hits, how does that all work? I mean, what most people need to understand is beyond the insurance, of which Columbia Gas is insured to $800 million, beyond insurance dollars, their sole income source comes from ratepayers. And so there isn't another sort of bucket, right? There's the insurance bucket and there is the rate bucket. And so one of the things that we have to sort of balance in our discussions with them is understanding where those dollars are going to be paid for. As it relates to schedule, we don't do more than a mile of roadway in any particular year, and we have a fairly aggressive roadway project, as you know. The idea of doing 17 miles in North Andover and, the miles in total that we're talking about, close to 70 miles, is a 3 to 5 year plan, and people should realize that. It doesn't matter, if you had it and you handed me a check for $150 million tomorrow, the logistics, the bidding process, the organizing of bids to make sure all that stuff to do 70 miles in roadways in the 3 communities is not something that most places would be equipped to pull off in a year. It's just not logical. Mm-hmm. And so what we have to set is a reasonable expectation. It may have all been torn up in 45 days, but to do curb and do it right. As an example, maybe one of those roadways was already scheduled to get a drain line 3 years from now. And we've got to make sure that we're not paving it and then ripping it up ourselves. Right. We may find that it's a natural process of evaluating the roadway or their own infrastructure involvement that there's a spot leak in a particular area and they're going to want to dig up the road 6 months from now. Well, we don't want to pave it 3 months from now. And so one of the things we have to, again, work on is the expectation of how long that plan will take. I believe it's 3 to 4 years to get through a plan from top to bottom, regardless of who pays for it. So making the assumption Columbia Gas pays and whatever the number turns out to be, I think a proper plan looks at 3 to 4 years to make sure we're taking into account those things. And I think that'll be difficult for the people who live in the area to accept, and I'm honest about that. I think it's, you ripped it up in 45 days, look at how my life has been disrupted, can't we just repave them? It's not that simple, and we don't want to do it in a way that we have to rip them up again, and we don't want to do it in a way that doesn't make any sense. So it's a lot easier, as we all know from owning homes. Demolition is a lot easier than construction, and the roadway projects are a little bit like demolition, but redoing the roadways are far more like construction, and they will need to be scheduled appropriately. Yep. Does that help?
Yeah, and I have one more follow-up, sorry, everyone, but should we anticipate in the next 3 to 4 or 5 years additional capital dollars to be discussed, like if there are any efficiencies, and while we tear up the roadway, anything else that we may need to do or want to do as a community while we're already doing that? I mean, looking at sidewalks or anything else, I mean, does that make sense to do at the same time, or?
Well, if there's coordinated work, for instance, primarily let's focus on utilities because I think it's the easiest one. If we already have a plan to replace the utilities in that street, then clearly there's an example of how we're going to factor that into a longer plan to make sure we replace the utility. If the utilities, water, sewer, and drain, as an example, is on schedule to be replaced, that may move that particular project further up. We have included sidewalk dollars in the $150 million number. Okay. That number actually scales from as low as 147 as high as close to 200 million. But I'm picking a number in the middle, or close to what I think is realistic at 150. There are some sidewalks, reuse of existing sidewalks, new berms. In cases where we get a lot of in our neighborhoods, places where it's lawn to street, and would be, would we be putting sidewalk there? We've incorporated a fair amount, or asked the consultant to incorporate a fair amount of sidewalk replacement in addition. And also we asked them to incorporate a substantial amount of tree plantings to make sure that we're not only just replacing damaged trees, but adding to our tree stock, because we feel that that's particularly important. To the question specifically of sidewalks, it's a little bit of a balance. So as we're going forward with trying to develop a comprehensive connectivity plan, the question is, were those streets naturally in that plan? I don't believe, based on what I know today, that that would be the case, because the connectivity plan probably centers around, right around here, right, and builds its way out in a sort of spider web format. Our connectivity will center largely around our natural walking locations. So up and down this road, what's going to be done by the state, connectivity back to the common. And generally speaking, we have very extensive sidewalk network in what's Zone 8. Zone 8 was the library district that was impacted. That already has a pretty extensive sidewalk inventory that I don't think was substantially damaged. And some of that was done by the Safe Routes to School projects a couple of years ago. So we will factor that in and add sidewalks where possible. The question is whether or not those other items are part of a broader plan. And if so, we're going to do it all at once. Yeah, and we'll supplement that. I'm not expecting at this point that it will substantially modify our capital improvement plan.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Clarification, $150 million, that's
Yeah.
just for town or for?
Oh, that's all three communities. All three communities.
Okay.
Yeah, we're, again, in terms of roadway miles, the nature of compliance with handicap codes and all those things, we are by far the smallest of those numbers. Lawrence has a bigger roadway mile stock. General compliance with getting them up to ADA codes, they have a heavier lift on some of those things. They have some traffic signals impacted. We don't have traffic signals impacted in any of the districts or the street lights. We're we're talking about roadways and curbs and sidewalks, and in some cases, that's a bigger number specifically in Lawrence.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Thank you. I have a quick question.
Yes.
Actually, probably not for you. The cards, the new business gift cards that are going out, I know when I watched the selectmen's meeting the other night, it hadn't been yet but announced, but this is being televised, so this would maybe an opportunity for you to say on TV, can you explain the new one that's coming up on the 15th?
Business gift cards is Megan.
Oh, that's Megan, oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So we announced it publicly on Friday. So the promotion is for this Saturday, December 15th, and it'll run basically from the morning until 7 p.m. So this one is different when we are not mailing out gift cards, and the amounts are slightly modified as well. So the minimum spend here is $100 at across North Andover, so it's not just limited to the impacted businesses as the first one was. So for if you go to any hair salon, restaurant, local retailer, so we are excluding national chains from the retail, not from the restaurant, but from the retail component. We are also excluding Stop and Shop and Market Basket, but Butcher Boy's in. So, because we've gotten questions on that. And so you would make your purchase, then you need to bring your $100 receipt, and you can have multiple from various shops, restaurants in town. You have to bring them to Town Hall. You bring them to Town Hall, we're going to hand you a gift card at that moment versus this back and forth mailing. In addition to that, we're also, with the number of receipts you have, let's say you have 2 receipts that qualify, so you'll get 2 $25 gift cards. That also will enter you twice into a raffle we're going to pull that night at 8 p.m. For a chance to win one of $3,000 gift cards.
That sounds fantastic.
Yep.
What is the reimbursement? Like the,
So the reimbursement, so for $100, $25.
So if you spent $200 at one establishment, would it be $50?
Not in this
Per
instance.
establishment.
Per establishment.
Okay,
So the previous
makes
one that
sense.
was, if you spent 200, you got 100.
yes.
But in this instance, it's, if you spend 100, 25. If you spend 200, still 25.
Gotcha.
Trying to get you to spread your money.
We want
No,
you to
that
spread the
makes
money.
sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Moving on, sir.
Great, 5-year forecast. Who's doing the, look at that, technology.
is this not where I'm supposed to be? There, sorry guys.
It's all right. Oh, I like that.
Yeah?
Plus button's great for people like me.
PDF.
There you go. Especially this slide, which is the worst slide in the deck. So, this is a 5-year forecast. We do this on an annual basis, obviously, and present a 5-year view, give you a sense, give the community a sense of what we expect over the upcoming years. I will preface this by the statement I typically have made somewhere near the end of this deck over the last 7 years. You here and those folks in the community should expect that you will see red figures as you move further out in the 5-year plan. And it's because we get more conservative about the projections. I think what you've found over the last 7 years or so is we find a way to close those gaps over time. We just want to make sure that we're conservative about the numbers that are presented. So this is the outline that sits in the budget calendar, and each and every one of these dates has already been publicly adopted by the Board of Selectmen as we kick off. Finance Committee has seen these as well. As we kick off the budget process, it starts, of course, with the budget calendar as the very first item, and it gets into the strategic planning goals of the Board of Selectmen and moves all the way through town meeting, which this year is May 14th, 2019. And these are all the individual steps and milestones that we'll pass through as we complete the budget process and get ready for town meeting on May 14th. So it is always important. This is, again, a regular slide. We want to make sure that the community, the Finance Committee, other stakeholders are aware of what our goals are, what our mission and vision are, to make sure that what we're recommending in terms of financing and spending is consistent with those goals. So the focus here, especially the underlined and bolded items, are really where we want people to draw particular attention. Our goal is to have a professional, cost-effective government, right, that has prompt and courteous service and provides sort of an equitable standard across the entire community. We think that's ultimately important. And obviously, we want government to be viewed with trust, and therefore the level of integrity that the community feels about their local government is of importance. I think we've accomplished a lot because all of the elected boards and appointed boards and the people who work here have developed their trust with the community. We think that that's essential. In the end, again, as a vision, the town of North Andover is dedicated to serving residents and to creating a community in which residents may join together for the common good. Working together, we've gotten a lot accomplished, and we believe that may continues to be the primary thrust of what we're trying to accomplish here. So we've done a really good job of transforming from what was a AA, a sort of unstable environment, into a AAA solid environment, centered around the idea that fiscal stability is the heart of all decisions we make. Again, a lot of the sort of tone and message is consistent with what we've developed in past years. I think what's missing here is the ability for this group, the Finance Committee, the Board of Selectmen and School Committee, Superintendent and I, to get creative to find ways to not only maintain fiscal stability, but continue to move and implement and recommend more programs by being creative. So we continue to focus on employee costs. It's an essential part of what we're talking about. I know this committee has talked at great length about that. That continues to be a focus. We're going to renew our effort. I think that what's happened in the Columbia Gas arena has reminded us that we have really good strategic partners, some in terms of local governments that are surrounding us, and some just strategic partnerships that may be public-private partnerships, and we're going to continue to focus on those to see how we can benefit from those to create some level of economies of scale. We're going to continue to upgrade our infrastructure. That's roads. We continue to, you'll notice in the capital plan, which will be rolled out the beginning of next week, heavy investment in public buildings continues. We're going to talk about facility master plan 2. We're going to talk about increased investment in our sidewalks. We continue to believe that what we don't want to do is sort of reinvent the past where we had to do such significant catch-up relative to infrastructure. And this, by the way, includes our technology infrastructure, which is identified in the last category. I think we find ourselves in a really unique spot compared to some municipalities in that we're really ahead of the curve in terms of technology. We're going to explore new revenue streams. Those become more difficult every year to find, but we'll continue to look at those. And debt service costs have been at the center of making sure that we're fiscally stable. We've maintained debt service spending at about 5% of revenues. You'll see in the CIP a week or so that we're at slightly above that number, but we feel like it's an opportunity to use some of those extra dollars toward the infrastructure. So these are the assumptions as it relates to revenues on the 5-year forecast. Again, every year we assume an increase of the tax levy of 2.5%. That's Prop 2.5. New growth has been tracking, the historical average has been about 600,000. What we've found in the last couple of years has been one big project in each year, which has added substantially to the new growth category. As it relates to conservative budgeting, the risk would be to chase those dollars and assume there's going to be construction, because new growth trails the economy. So from our perspective, we want to be conservative about this new growth number. I think there's some opportunities to talk about the change in new growth from actual to budget and use some of those dollars on a regular basis to invest to offset the OPEB liability. I'll be working with the OPEB committee in the next, if I can find the time, next 30 to 60 days to develop an OPEB report that talks about some of the specific ways that we can address that long-term OPEB liability. Other things that we're sort of focused on, we'll catch up to those.
Sorry about
That's all right.
Excuse me.
So one more bump on the plus button. Just so people like me with glasses can read. So we had a debt exclusion fall off the books this year, a significant decline of more than $1.2 million, which is attributable to the Thompson School, Middle School, and Osgood Hill expiring debt. I think the remaining excluded debt sits around the 500, just south of $600,000 number, so a fairly modest number. We anticipate local receipts, primarily driven by motor vehicle excise, will increase by 3.8% in the first year and 3% over the remaining 4 years, pretty consistent with what we've seen in the past. Motor vehicle excise is always a good indicator to us of where the economy sits. If you see motor vehicle excise flatten out, it tells you that people aren't purchasing new cars, and we're going to see that number soften. We saw that from, say, 2000 to 2012 or 13, and we've started to see some pretty steady growth in that category. We've had a long-standing practice that what we do is we include as state aid the adopted state budget figure from the year we're currently in, and we use that to project into next year. And therefore, if there are changes in that, it gives us some flexibility relative to financing. We're going to continue that practice into this year. So the fiscal 20 state aid figure is actually the fiscal 19 adopted state budget. The operating transfers, which come primarily from the enterprise funds, every year go up by about 2.5%. They cover for indirect costs associated with running those enterprise funds. And those budgets go up by about 2.5%, so these indirect costs go up by about 2.5%. What does that mean in the form of a pie chart? It means we are, as usual, somewhere in the 76 to 77% tax levy driven. So most of our income comes off of property tax. Of the total property tax burden on the community, approximately 87% of that is borne by the residential taxpayer, with 13% by the commercial taxpayer. The selectmen on an annual basis review the tax classification or shifting process where they can allocate more to one category over another. On a regular basis, the selectmen shift approximately 4% from the residential burden to the commercial burden. They did that again in a most recent meeting. Tax rate has been adopted. So although the underlying tax burden falls 87% on residents and 13% on businesses, once the selectmen complete the shift, about 4% of that shifts from the residential side to commercial side. So you end up with about an 83% residential load total to the taxes and about 17%, which is business. And that happened again this year, pretty consistent with what's happened in years past.
Andrew, what does that number look like in the last, I don't know how far back the series goes, but
Yeah.
20 years, has there been significant changes? And how does it compare to Andover and Lawrence on that mix?
Yeah, that's great. So the tax levy itself?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the tax levy, we used to include a slide, which we did not, I don't think we included this year, but we'll see if we can chase it down. But we didn't include a slide. We went back to, somewhere about 12 or 13 years where we took the pie chart and made it a bar chart so we could track it across the years. And what we found was back in, say, 04 or 05, the tax levy was lower because those supporting revenue sources, like local receipts, were higher. State aid starts to soften. The other local receipts start to soften as you get in 05, 06, 07. So communities started to be impacted 2 or 3 years. I think that was well dating before then. And again, the levy doesn't shift much. It's more the other costs. So if state aid is relatively flat and your local receipts like excise are relatively flat, and we don't bring in, for instance, new pilot payments, we don't bring in new hosts, generally all those resources were baked in, then as your costs go up and those other aspects of your overall revenue don't change, then the only piece left to share more of the burden is the tax levy. Because that does go up every year. It goes up by 2.5% plus new growth. So that's increasing annually, while over a decade period, almost every other revenue source was level or declining. And so there was a point where it peaked out 2 years ago, it was at 77%. And we started to see at least a slight trend the other way. So it flattened out to the point that it had gone from 73 to about 77%. It was never lower than 73%, dating back more than 15 years. That's been about the tax burden. It peaked out at 77%, I think, 2 years ago, and now we've seen a 1% dip in the last 2 years as the tax piece, it's not that the tax piece isn't growing, it's those other ancillary revenues are growing fast enough to be just north of the tax levy growth. So if tax levy is going up by 2.5%, we're seeing some of those other revenue sources increase slightly faster, and therefore they've picked up a percentage of what that total used to be. I don't think we'll return to the days that it'll be 73% tax levy. I just don't think the other revenue growth will support it. I don't think it's going to happen. So I think you may get someday, 5 or 6 years out from now, that figure is 75%, but I don't think we're returning to the day that the tax levy drops to 73%. That makes
You know
sense?
what the number is at
Yeah.
Andover or Lawrence?
Yeah, so I would expect in Andover,
60?
no, I think I wouldn't think it's 60. So you have to, it's always interesting municipal budget comparisons, and I'll give you why. The state aid figure in Lawrence will be, extraordinary. It won't be near, having worked in a dense urban area for a while, I can tell you the state aid number on Lawrence, I'm guessing, could be 30-40% of their budget. Here it's 11%. State aid alone off the education side will be, oh goodness, 4 times, 5 times what ours is. Tens of millions of dollars more. So it's a tough comparison.
So that's less comparable.
That's the
But
far less
Andover,
comparable. From an Andover perspective, and I just only go off the top of my head, although they have a sort of budget tool that would show this, it's interesting is that Andover has approximately 32,000 residents. We have close to 29. But as a tax levy perspective, in terms of assessed value, they have nearly double the assessed value we have in an area, a geographic area that's only about 10% larger. They also have 150 more non-school employees than we do. So we have 210 municipal employees here on a budget of a geographic area that's only 10% larger. They actually have 150 more municipal employees. So what you would see is numbers that look similar, I think, largely similar, but they generate just a lot more revenue from, I think their commercial piece is higher. They shift higher onto the commercial side. So they have a higher commercial shift than we do. And I think that the tax levy piece would be similar, but it's more shifted toward the commercial. And so they generate more commercial revenue. And so at the time that Prop 2.5 was baked in, they generally generate more revenue. They also probably have had a fair amount of individual capital overrides. So I think your tax levy number would be all of that anyway. So they don't have a lot of additional other local revenue. They may have some additional local receipts because they have probably more vehicles. But their state aid would be similar too. It wouldn't be much different.
I can't get past the 110 employees.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's funny.
It's a lot of
Do we
people.
have services, that they do in-house that we outsource?
Yes. Yeah, so you talk about efficiency, and this is, I'm not, pitting one community or another, but it's a common point of conversation in and out, North Andover and Andover, is we outsource, when folks talk about sort of strategic decisions to make sure that we can be sustainable, we outsource a significant amount of services that they don't. So examples would be, they do a lot of in-house, I believe their streetlight repair, as an example, is all in-house staff. We contract it. There are other services. That number is actually 150 employee difference. It's actually I think it's 212 to 371. It's close to 160 employee difference across the board. And so they operate different.
Understood?
Which we've really realized during the gas disaster. It was funny, I was standing with the town manager of Andover, who's done a great job, by the way. I think he's done a really fantastic job. And I said, boy, this is having a real drain on resources. And somehow we were talking about something specifically, and he identified a position. And I said, I don't have one of those. I said, so how many positions do you have again? And he says, well, we have 371 or something like that, staff. I said, oh. I said, is that the school side? And he said, no, that's the town side. I said, how many have? I go, 212. Yeah, something like that. So it's different, everything's different. There's no complaints from our side. I think we're in a position to have to do a lot of strategic things, and I think we do those and do them well. There are just some differences. But those differences wouldn't necessarily relate to the chart. It's just spending. I think the charts would be remarkably close. Yep. So yes, sir.
You mentioned something, and I didn't really get it. A shift between residential and commercial.
Yes.
Could you explain
Sure.
it one more time? So what that means and how it's decided
Sure.
about that shift?
Every Massachusetts community is allowed, so you start with this assumption that if you had all of your taxes generated between commercial and residential, you could set a tax rate based upon all of those values, the total value of the property. That would be what's called 1-to-1. There's no difference between commercial and residential. So the tax rate would be one rate. Let's pick a rate, $15. And if you're a commercial business or a residential business, the tax rate would be the same. Communities are allowed to move or shift the burden of taxes from residential to commercial at levels that vary from 1-to-1 to 1.75 under some circumstances, 1.5 cap in other circumstances. And literally do exactly shift the tax value and say, okay, since the residential burden is so heavy here, right, meaning that we're talking about 87% of the total load, but businesses can have an indirect impact on a number of factors. State law allows you to move some of that to commercial that otherwise would sit in residential. The shifting in that regard is called setting the residential factor, or setting the factor. And as a result of that setting the factor, you can move some of the burden that would be residential onto the commercial side. A lot of communities don't, some do it, some don't. Some simply live with a single rate. So Andover has a shift. I believe Florence has a shift. I'm not sure. I think they do. I think this is 175. And North Andover many years ago adopted this shift. It's set by the Board of Selectmen. So every year the Board of Selectmen decide what portion of the tax levy that would otherwise be 1-to-1, equal distribution, gets moved onto the commercial from the residential to benefit the residential taxpayer. On average, this Board of Selectmen over the last 7 years, following a very steady methodology, has determined that they're going to calculate the economic impact of how much they want to shift. That's $3 million in tax levy. Then every year they've done the calculation, so approximately $3 million, get shifted from the commercial taxpayers in aggregate to the residential taxpayer. And they've calculated a factor, of boring with all the details. This year it's 1.36. And that 1.36 translates to approximately $3 million that otherwise would be paid by the residential taxpayer being shifted to the commercial taxpayer.
Did you watch the last meeting? They actually went through this, and every year they do, and it's a really robust conversation. It's not simple, it's complicated, and you get to hear who's the gentleman that comes up and speaks?
The assessor.
The assessor.
Yeah.
Excuse me. It can be confusing, but it's worth watching. I mean,
Also, too, material that is part of the packet, your memo explains
Yeah.
it very well as well. So it's I won't call it good reading, really into things.
I'm not sure it's good watching either, but I appreciate that.
It is. It's informative, and you can follow it.
Yeah.
And you bring out your calculator as I did at the meeting, and you can see the factor.
Trying to figure it out.
But when you look at beyond the calculator, so what's the intent in general, the overriding philosophy by doing it?
I would assume, I don't know when the statute was originally adopted, which is many years ago, but I assume the overall intention is to indicate that the residential taxpayer is the primary group that pays for the taxes in the community, receives some kind of break in comparison to businesses. Now, some of that could be that the business pays taxes, so I can't speak to the debate at the legislature when it happened. It just gives the opportunity to recognize that the residential population, which is 87% of the burden, maybe should share less of that burden. Beyond that, you can get into sort of all kinds of philosophical arguments. One would be, well, the residents are here every day and they're enjoying services, but businesses, although bring an economy here, also bring cars here, and they bring People may not live here and be paying for the services, but they may have an impact that goes beyond the taxes they otherwise generate. Philosophically, it's a complicated one. I'm not certainly arguing one side or the other. I will tell you this. Once you shift the taxes, you're never shifting them back. So whenever that decision was made, and that's, in fairness, in every community, the time to have that really challenging conversation. Because this year alone, if you decided to go to a 1-to-1 rate, you would have been adding to the tax burden of of 87% of the taxpayers, hundreds of dollars to make it even again at 1-to-1. And no one's doing that. No one's doing that. So, you could argue it was a political tool many years ago to be able to say, I'm benefiting, this group. I don't know. I can't speak to the history of it. It exists in a lot of communities at various levels. Some communities don't have it at all, but there are communities that do. So every year we get into this. I appreciate the fact you thought it was interesting. We get into this complicated discussion about numbers that don't seem to make any sense. And all what in the end they're doing is part of the reason the selectmen, to the memo, part of the reason the selectmen they do what they do today, because every year trying to have that conversation where there was no set thinking was what made the discussion really difficult. Well, why 1.36 year before one? So part of the philosophy that this board adopted some years ago was that, okay, we know what $3 million in value is. Why don't we agree every year, regardless of what the factor is going to be, that we're going to hold steady that shifting of $3 million in value. And so the decisions this year was actually pretty easy. The decisions are easier because they're focused on the value rather than all of the individual numbers on a page.
And interesting enough, even with the shift, our rate for businesses is not high in comparison to our neighboring communities, and that's evidenced by the gentleman from the Merrimack Valley Chamber of Commerce, who is there every year representing local businesses. Even he said, you guys are doing, he doesn't have much to say or argue about because it's not an onerous burden on the business community, in his opinion, so.
Do we have the lowest commercial tax rate in the Merrimack Valley?
I doubt that. I don't know that, but I doubt it. And it always, I'm chuckling a little bit because I am in meetings where the Merrimack Valley is 8 communities. I'm in meetings where the Merrimack Valley is 80 communities. It depends,
I see. How you define that. I understand. I get it.
Some people say we're somewhere up at Concord, New Hampshire, and I can't speak to, so it's a really wide range. I think of the communities that do a shift, so I'd leave it to that population. The communities that do a shift, which is a fair amount of them, we do a relatively minor shift in terms of value and cost.
Okay.
So we're below $20 a thousand on the commercial. We're in 13 and change on a residential. Both the commercial and single-family residential will see a decrease in taxes this year, even with the shift, because we've seen a shift of the values move aggressively towards large-scale apartments and condominiums and the debt exclusion. We'll give you all kinds of numbers, Tomas, and if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to. But if you may want to read about 10 pages worth of just data, and you'll have a whole bunch of questions, I'm more than happy to answer for you. Or try. Okay, so health insurance. So we've talked about health insurance a lot. I think we continue to track in a positive environment in health insurance. The transition of the GIC certainly has had its days of challenges, but not from a financial perspective. It continues to be the right decision. It saved not just money in the budget, but also helped on the OPEB liability as well. We're showing you some health insurance numbers. They're a little aggressive, but I think we wanted to be consistent with what we've shown in the past. The historical increases over the last couple of years have been, 5, 6%, 4, 5, 6%. You may recall, sort of predating the GIC transfer, we're averaging 10 to 15% on our insurance increases. So although we'll continue to watch health insurance, we generally feel pretty good about that moving forward. Other personnel benefits primarily driven by the workers' comp and the retirement. We went through 1 or 2 years where the workers' comp was trending upward. We're seeing, we've gotten some job training and other related activities to sort of to address that, and we feel pretty good about it. Overall, as a budget number, it's not as big a budget number. It's several $100,000 committed to your retirement, which is going to grow to several $1 million. The retirement continues to be, a challenge. We receive a funding schedule for that. I do note that the Essex Regional Retirement System got more conservative about their assumptions. That's a good thing, but it also means by being more conservative, you may see an increase in the overall appropriation. So what do I mean by conservative? Their expectation for a return on investment has been lowered, which is good. Their expectation for average salary increases in communities have gone up. And as a result of that, it's a better, more stable approach, but it will result in the kinds of increases you see here as it relates to the retirement appropriation. We provide the actual debt service figures. Obviously, there will be listed in the budget itself. We don't add to those, but we do include in the 5-year forecast the assumption of the CIP's additional debt, and so that's factored in here. So the capital improvement debt assumed over the next 5 years is factored into the 5-year forecast. General government spending has been modest increases, pacing right about where Prop 2.5 is every year. We've been able to do that and manage, staff and expectations and services. We typically assume about a 3% increase after the initial year, and that's no different in this particular year. So general government is all the non-public safety, non-school stuff. Support services, those are those common services like the technology side, like the facilities. Those are what sits in support services. And again, we see those as 2.5% in year one, 3% after that.
Andrew,
Yeah, sure.
can we go back to health and insurance for a second? The rising cost of healthcare in this country has been described as a tapeworm eating away at the capacity of the economy and our potential. And this budget is a great exhibit in that we're growing our collections 2 or 3%. Hopefully we'll fudge it and make it 4 or 5. But everything related to health and benefits is growing 7 or 8.
Right.
And so if that continues on, and that has continued for many years, it takes up the entire budget. So do we have any strategies, real briefly? Is there an elevator pitch on arresting the rate of growth from 7 or 8, which is, like college tuition, sort of in a runaway, compared to what we're growing the rest of the revenue?
I do like the college tuition analogy as a parent of 3 kids that I'm paying for over time. Yes, and so a couple of things. One is that as a conservative approach to forecasting, the numbers you see in front of you are higher than what our historical increases have been over the last 5 years, which is at closer to 5%. So that's still a delta to the operational growth and revenue growth of 2.5 to 3%, but it's closer, and I think that's an indication of going to the GIC. I think our conscious decision in the year one of savings, as an example, was not. We made a conscious, one of the best decisions this group ever made, and you have great support for it, was in year one of this transfer to the GIC when we saved $3 million, was a conscious decision actually not to budget down by the $3 million and spend those dollars, but really leave them there to provide a cushion over multiple years. Right. So we continue to see that cushion as an available option. So if we really got sort of jammed on OPEB-related stuff, we have a capacity to sort of eat into those savings that were never drawn down on an annual basis. So,
right.
so I think that that's important and meaningful because it's done things like for the last several years, if we've run snow and ice at, we could really use a good year, but we've run $1 million over. It's really the shock absorber that is health insurance that's helped us. 2, if you have a chance, again, another light read without less numbers, read our PEC agreement, because one of the things that was really done, which is the agreement between public employees and the community regarding health insurance, some very significant important decisions are in that document that many communities have now started to talk about, but we incorporated several years ago. So one is that all new employees are actually coming in at a higher copay percentage, a higher contribution percentage than existing employees. So over time, that number, although we're still projecting it at the 7 and 7.5, over time, every new employee is picking up 10% more of the share of health insurance than was the case several years ago. That's one significant item we don't sort of talk about in here, but it's a strategy that a lot of folks are taking aggressively with OPEB. We've baked that into the agreement, and it's really important. We also talk about one of the things that was a big conversation and took many months in Andover, as an example, in many communities, is those folks who retire who are non-Medicare eligible yet. We treat, and they want a plan because they're leaving state. that is the most expensive plan. And in our PUC agreement, we talk about that those folks who want to take the portable plan, the plan that allows them to relocate to other states, if they're not Medicare eligible yet, then they pay an increasing percentage to be in that, I hate to use Cadillac term, Cadillac healthcare because it's not fair either. But we've recognized that that's a big cost. This was the center of the debate in Andover of how to treat these folks and change them, because that was too much of a financial burden that was not anticipated in our contract with employees. That's something that we incorporated into our PUC agreement that's real. I think there are other opportunities. Denise has already started to have conversations about incentivizing people to get off the health insurance plan. She has great experience in that, and we're looking to roll out a plan that starts to incentivize people to get off. We think that there's a way forward there that will give people financial incentive to come off the plan, but still be cheaper than paying for the plan. That has an immediate budgetary impact and long-term OPEB benefit. So we do think that there are opportunities to address the health insurance. I think that it'll continue, in fairness to your point, that and retirement. I think they'll switch spaces. I think the retirement actually will be one that's far more difficult to manage because it's fixed on a set actuarial schedule. And unless they meet those, the economy's doing well now, the stock market's doing well now, but you have 2 or 3 years where you're dealing with a 4% return on investment. For anybody who's ever done that math, if your bogey is 8% and you do 4%, you need more than just another 4% the next year to get to your 8%, right? So the retirement actually, if they win a race, the retirement one scares me a little more at this point, because I think there are proactive steps we can continue to take on health insurance.
Do you mean 8% per year here over the 5-year period, or 8%
For retirement?
total over the 5 years?
6.9% in year one, and 8% in 8% for the next 2, and then 8.5 for the 2 after that.
No, but it says the primary driver of the increase is the primary retirement appropriation, which will increase 8% over the 5-year period.
Yeah, it's
8%
missed
per
it.
year?
It's 8% per year on average.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Wow.
Big number.
Yeah.
Now, at this point, that's a $4 to $5 million number compared to a health insurance number up at 11 million. So
Yeah.
it still represents. I think if I could do the 25-year sort of line chart as it relates to these two, I think you'll find that we'll take steps to manage the health insurance reasonably, benefit design change like the GIC's been doing, but it'll be far more difficult to manage the retirement appropriation. And I think you'll see those lines get closer over time, which is, I'm hoping we get to 2035 and the system is fully funded and then that number drops dramatically. But every time throughout the Commonwealth, when communities get closer to that, you run 3 years of 5% return, not 8, or 2% return, or God forbid a negative 5% return, and then that we have to sort of recalibrate that, and that's always a concern.
I'm just trying to get to 2035.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm both. I'm stopping short of that. I don't need to get that far. So it's a fair question, and I think we're cognizant of it and have started to take the kinds of steps to manage it well. I think, again, we have some things we have to account for, not just health insurance, but OPEB. I think that there's been the recommendation made, and you'll see it in my budget, for every position recommended in every budget moving forward. I'm going to tell you exactly what the OPEB cost is. And I'm likely going to recommend that if this board and town meeting and others approve the addition of staff, that we set aside those pre-funded dollars in an OPEB account for every hire. Now, understand that number could be 60 to 65,000 per hire. So if you're looking at adding,
Wow.
It's a big number pre-funding. So at the pace we've been adding staff, if you look at our staff headcounts, towns gone up about 5 or 6 positions, schools up 30 or 40 positions. You're going to talk about real number to fund that. But one way to stop the bleeding as it relates to the OPEB side is to pre-fund all new additions and then start to work off the burden we already created.
Right.
I think it's a great approach. Are we here a bit unique? How are other communities approaching that in Mass? And that was actually my question. What's the thinking in the state? I mean, you're not alone with that problem. It's each community here in Massachusetts, in all the states, basically nationwide.
It's a national problem. It's a national issue. I think it's all over the place. I think we're doing an effective job. I think we're working within the construct that we have to make sure that whatever we choose to do to address OPEB is consistent with best practices when possible, and setting aside dollars to protect against, sort of the downside. There are some communities capable of pulling out full funding schedules and paying for this for 10 years or 20 years. That's not a recommendation I would make for us, because I think we have to balance our expectations for services. But there are certainly places that are doing nothing. So, we're, I think, doing the best we can within the construct of who we are financially, right? Because part of that is the allocation of limited resources, and we have limited resources, so we have to work within that construct. So I think we're doing well, and we'll continue to focus on it and try to come up with creative ways to address it.
And we've benchmarked the plan against what other towns in Massachusetts are doing as well.
Yep.
And there's been a lot of information sharing and strategy planning and teamwork amongst other towns. Because you're right, everybody is facing the same issue. It's very, very few towns like Wellesley that don't have our problems probably times 2 or 3.
Yeah, at least 2 or 3, I think, in some cases. There are some communities that have not set aside a single dollar, or set aside several million, and we're talking about more, right? There are some communities who haven't even had the conversation.
It's the #1 threat to our AAA rating.
Yeah,
Would you agree with
think
that?
I would agree with that only in the but I would say that with the caveat. Well, I would actually, I'd be fine with someone saying that. What I would say to you,
Okay, I'll say it.
how's that? I would say to you that our #1 threat has always been for me that we start to think we're someone we're not. That we embrace who we are, which has been a really successful model of strategic and just north of incremental growth. And that we stay within that construct because it's delivered some really great results. And we don't get so impatient to think we're somewhere we're not, that it all can't go another way. I think we've shown we all in this room can identify, literally not one success, but dozens of successes in unique ways to think, everything from public construction to special education stabilization funds and those kind of things. I think the #1 risk is that we get impatient and believe that somehow the spigot is on forever. And part of that is health insurance, right? But if someone were to say health insurance is the #1 risk, I can get that. I worry the most every day about the impatience of thinking we can be someplace faster than we can be. That's what I worry about every day.
Described it as the control the appetite for unsustainable growth.
That's me,
It's a movement.
every day. Ask Stan, I talk to him about it all the time. So the other services are going, we're not uncommon, so we're recommending this year the school budget goes up about 3.75%, and 3.5% for the balance of the process for the balance of the 5 years. State assessments, those numbers have been up and down. For those of you who don't know at home, we actually get billed by the state for a number of services. We spray for mosquitoes. You're paying for that. We get billed by the Commonwealth for the Northeast Mosquito Control, whatever it's called. It has a lot of names to it. The MBTA bills us. We get a bill from the state for the MBTA because the train passes through town, even though there is an MBTA service here. We get billed by the MVRTA for direct transportation costs. So there are costs we pay for that the Commonwealth bills us, and they bill us by netting those costs off from our state aid. We expect those to grow at about 4% in the first year and 5% annually thereafter. Public Works, again, is typically north of general government, but south of the public safety departments. This year, we're estimating they'll be right at the public safety numbers. So we're assuming that our biggest 3 departments, Public Works, Police, and Fire, will go up at about 3%. This is inclusive of salary increases. They're all under contract. And so we're assuming that that's inclusive of that. There won't be any deviations from that. We've been able to accomplish that pretty well, keep the departments moving forward, adding equipment to the departments, doing a lot of exciting things, and staying around that number.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you anticipate, did you mean that in FY20 you're going to recommend with every new position that you set aside the appropriate?
Yes.
Okay.
Wait till you see that number.
Curious how that I'm curious how that impacts 2020, but we'll see.
It impacts it. So I'm not anticipating we're going to budget that. I'm anticipating that through town meeting we would shift reserves or some kind of. Now I think this all builds into sort of an OPEB, a long-term comprehensive OPEB strategy that I would assume would come out of the OPEB committee, and maybe they would disagree with that. I think they'll generally be. I think they'll see that idea as being most transparent, which is important. I would see that as a transfer from an existing reserve. So we're already putting $500,000 to $1 million in OPEB. So maybe it supplants that particular contribution. But I think at some point we need a way to understand what the dollars we're putting in the fund mean, rather than putting dollars in a fund. right? And so that might be one way to do that. It may be in addition to that. I think those are all up for discussion. But I would see that as, we've been transferring money out of the health insurance trust fund into this account. I would see that as a reserve fund transfer. I don't think we could sustain that. You want to have a really exciting conversation. Pop that in the middle of the budget and see how many of the positions you'd hire. But I'm not likely to recommend that.
That was what I initially thought you meant.
Yes.
That's why I went,
It'll have this, it's intended to have a little bit of a shock value for everybody to realize that when
Yeah.
you're hiring a position, it means X, right? That's part of the intention, and that's valid. And as a community, that goes to the sustainability question. Do we have the means to put the dollars in to sustain
Yep.
that kind of spending? Yep, I think it's a fair way to look at the data. Oh, so all that means this. Whatever this means, slide down just a bit for me if you would, I appreciate it. There you go. So if you get near the end, a little bit further, just there, we're getting close. So that puts us, all of the assumptions in the previous page puts us at about 285,000 out of balance going into the current fiscal year, fiscal 2020. And as you should be comfortable and familiar with, we used to make these red as they got negative, but it was like rubbing salt in the wounds, so we stopped doing it. And so as you would expect, and you should expect from past practice here, that number is going to increase because we've increased our assumption of spending generally and decreased our assumption of revenue. So this is traditional, good old style conservative forecasting that puts us at about a negative 3,000,001 going to year 5.
It doesn't seem to have changed. Did you say it had changed?
No, this is very.
Since the last,
The only thing that's changed is that I used to make those used to be red.
Yeah, okay.
That's
okay.
it.
I was gonna say.
I think that's the
sounds
change.
1,000,002
Yeah,
per
it's about right.
Like the same. Yeah.
This is plus or minus, I'd have to go back to the 2012 presentation I made, but plus or minus over the last 7 years, these
So
look
you can say you made it into the black.
made it to the black. I did, see, that's progress.
That's not what they mean.
That's not what they mean, yeah. Very good. So this is pretty consistent. I don't want to make everybody completely comfortable with it, but this is pretty consistent, right? This is our challenge every year, is to make these numbers go to zero, as we do in the far column to the left. And none of the numbers step off the page to me to be shocking or alarming.
Not so smart question. I believe I heard that in the last selectmen meeting, the tax rates were adjusted and people would be paying less taxes? Help me
No.
again,
Yeah,
because
help you
that
out.
against a negative black number is confusing to me.
Yeah, well, it's because that's not, so that statement, what's the infamous statement that's made? The only thing we can be certain of is death and taxes. It should be death and tax increases.
Yeah.
We will raise 2.5% more in property taxes than we raised last year.
Yes,
That's a fact.
yes.
All that happened the other night, not all that happened, but the tax discussion is who pays that? And you have strata of tax property. So you have single-family homes and two-family homes and three-family homes and apartments and commercial property and industrial property. You have all those categories. So although the single-family homeowner,
Excuse me, guys, I'm having trouble
Yeah.
focusing, just for a minute.
so although you have the single-family homeowner that will see a reduction in taxes,
Yes,
the aggregate taxes raised in this community is going up by 2.5% on a levy that sits somewhere in the $70 million range every single year.
so the
Doesn't
singles
change.
will go down.
The singles go down, and the only reason the singles are going down, the primary reason is because some of the other categories are going up. So your condos in
Yes.
value, because the single-family homeowners carried the tax burden here from 2000 to 2010. As everything else, even when the single-family residential was soft, it was not as soft as condominiums, as an example, which really tanked, or your apartment buildings, or some of your commercial. That's now slowly changing the other way. So every category, I believe, every category of residential taxpayer went up this year. Your condos went up, your single families went up, your apartments went up, all those went up. All your commercial values went up. But relatively speaking, your single-family property homeowners saw a 6% increase in value, but your condos saw a 25% increase in value. Your apartments, because everybody wants to live in apartments,
Yes.
nearly doubled. It went up 54%.
Yeah.
from whatever the number is, right? From 100 to 200. So you saw, because of that, all that's happening is the same amount of new taxes are being raised.
Yes.
The burden of who pays for that has shifted this year because of the percentage increases in those categories. Taxes are going up. Taxes go up every year, every
Less
single year.
Than our expenses.
I'm sorry?
Our taxes go up less than our expense costs.
No, that's not true. It's not true at all, because every year we balance the budget. Every year we balance the budget.
Fair.
So let's remember where we were. In 2007, we had negative free cash. We had negative reserves. In 2009, we have negative reserves. We had a negative outlook on our bond rating. Today, we sit here with average budgetary growth. If you add in other things, like benefit cost of employees, you add in some of the creative things we've done to fund other resources, and we're increasing government on the school side at 4%, on the non-school side at 3.5 to 3 to 3.5%. Our reserves now sit at $11 million for free cash from what was negative. We've gone to a AAA bond rating, which is funded out of pocket $30 million in 7 capital projects, right? And yet, for the last 7 years, and we now have a couple $1 million in OPEB, for the last 7 years, I've been showing you the same slide.
Right, because you're doing very creative
No,
techniques, don't you think?
No, it's because we've all agreed that we spend what we have and no more, and that we conservatively budget and
Right.
present the image that cautions us not to get too excited.
Yes,
That's what this is.
yes.
It's not reflecting the taxpayers are not paying enough. It's not reflecting the taxes are going down. Our expenditure, if our
Right.
expenditures were higher than our
Fiscally-
revenues,
Right.
we wouldn't be generating reserves. It's just, this is a reflection of wanting to, every year, caution us that we need to be conservative about how we approach the community's finances. That's all it is. So I try not to get too hung up on any one number or another.
There's a page in one of the packets of the tax rates that shows the increases year over year of the property values that is eye-opening, that will tell you how things shifted around.
Yeah.
You know, all it is shifting around the total bucket.
Right.
Yep, that's all it is.
Would we ever go to, I mean, I know there's a 2.5% increase. Would we ever go to, we as a town, to like 2%, 1.5, and just limit ourselves on the revenue side, so we are putting a lot
Yes.
more of a break, you know? Because, 2.5% on 100 million is a lot more than 2.5 on 80 million. And we, not too long ago, our budget was at 80 million, and now, you're breaking the $100 million ceiling next year for the first time.
Boy,
What is the?
How do I answer
what is
that question?
recommendation for? Like, what's the thought process?
Well, if you have 2.5 on 100 million, it's 2.5 million, not what is it?
I know what you meant.
Yeah. But on 80
Sorry.
million, it's a little bit less in absolute terms. And
So you were just talking about a reduction in revenue.
yeah, I mean, it's it's
That's what you're talking about.
it's like I take this example in the office. A 5% increase for high paid employees a lot more than the 5% for lower paid
Oh,
employees.
there's no doubt.
So, and if you always keep the 2.5%, you're actually increasing percentage-wise, not more, but in absolute terms, it's increasing quickly,
Yeah.
and so.
So let me give you two, this is a slippery slope here. So let me say to you that 3 or 4 years ago, as all of the stars aligned financially, we did that. We presented a recap which did not raise the full 2.5%. It was an interesting reaction. I mean, this board, different members, but this board had to deal with the belief that we had left money on the table, which isn't a completely accurate way to reflect on it, but it was interesting. I would say this, that the 2.5 isn't in and of itself the issue, as long as you're not spending every dollar of it. So what I would say to you is, as long as we can continue to get to the end of the year, and I'm not coming back to town meeting asking $1 million for snow and ice, or I'm not asking every department to stop spending because we need $1 million. And as long as we continue to maintain reserves at the levels that support the AAA bond rating and address OPEB liability, then raising the 2.5 isn't a problem. I think the taxpayer, what we owe the taxpayer is not to spend every dollar they give us and have nothing left at the end of the day when something complicated arises. That's what's changed. So what's changed is that our relationship with the taxpayer is, we're going to make sure that we spend your dollars in a way that we don't have to say we couldn't accomplish what we promised when we went into that year. So when we set goals for a particular year, we deliver on those goals. We don't have to stop and say, yeah, we didn't quite get there. And the reason is we've created enough flexibility, nothing crazy, but enough financial flexibility to be able to accomplish that when things arise that we didn't anticipate. Year after year, those snow and ice deficits were being raised to the following year, impacting the next year's budget, or they were coming out of a different spot. And that's the easiest example to use. But our increase in reserves gives us the financial flexibility to be able to say to the taxpayer in good faith, we've made your organization, we've made your town stronger. We've got a AAA bond rating, paying Latin debt service. Last year we needed additional one-time revenue to pay for capital costs. We did that to keep debt service low. I think our relationship and our contract with our taxpayers is transparent and honest because we're using their dollars and at the end of the day, they're not asking again for what we promised the first time. So I'm okay with the 2.5% because we're doing that. If we were spending every nickel and couldn't do the kinds of things we're doing, I think the taxpayer would have a real argument with us. Why should I give you more if you're not going to do it, use it the right way? But I feel like we're doing it the right thing.
Such community too, is the choices that we make. I mean, we want to have the sidewalks everywhere that we want to have, or we want to have that new fire station, or we want to have a refurbished school, or all the things that we do on a regular basis that everyone really likes. It's just choices. We made those choices several years ago, where the choices were, we have to eliminate 10 teachers or 20 teachers, or no one gets raises. I mean, we went through that. So I have a hard time arguing the philosophy, because I've seen the other side. Remember those. I mean, not that it's doom and gloom, but it was kind of gloomy. It was tough.
So this is what it all looks like. A lot of colors on this chart. So it's pretty consistent. Schools set at about 50%. We do not allocate, we don't do a cost center allocation for certain benefits like group health and retirement back to the individual departments. So in fairness, the schools, if you added it all in off the general fund, is probably closer to 55%, not counting grant funds, which is another 20 million or so. But this is the way we allocate it. We don't do a cost center approach. You do it. Public Works, these are, to Chuck's comments earlier, I think if you looked at this kind of chart in other communities, are pretty consistent, plus or minus pretty consistent. I think our debt service number is manageable and more conservative than some, and our public safety numbers and support services. This is pretty consistent numbers. I think our health insurance number is actually relatively low at 12%.
How do shared services factor in there?
Yeah. So the way we budget is we start by funding the shared services section first. So joint IT, purchasing, we take those shared services and agree, since they're shared by both departments,
Just put it half and
we'll
half.
fund those. Doesn't mean that they get everything they want as a request, but we agree to fund those first and then look at the available dollars and distribute them afterwards. So that's how we, pretty simply view them.
And is that just IT? What are the shared? Because I know that's changed over the last few years.
IT, we've gone in and out with a couple of additional services. So facilities is a shared cost.
Oh, it is completely shared cost. Okay.
Completely shared cost, has been for some number of years. IT
Okay.
is the same way,
Yeah.
completely. There's one sort of anomaly to the IT, but we increased, almost all positions are now in the shared IT. There was a point at which there was a couple of school positions. So we go sometimes to the percentages a year, but that goes to the creativity. We added a school position that was funded off the school budget last year into joint IT, which really created an enhanced capacity on the school side. We're doing things like
How
that.
about
So
payroll? Was payroll?
we
tried
did for a
it.
bit. Yeah, it didn't work, so we
Not
went
so
back.
good. Okay.
Yep. So purchasing, facilities,
And IT.
and IT
Okay.
are the Bs. Other auditing sits in a central number too. Yep. We do a sort of an off-book one where the legal counsel is an example where we directly fund from the schools a portion of legal counsel, but the legal counsel appears on the town side of the budget. So it goes to the comment made earlier. This is what, retirement looks like from 20 to 27 based on the assumptions that are provided. And you see that number is, at some point with the reference that was made, at some point I'll overlay the health insurance schedule of this. And I think if we can carry it out to, 2037, we'd start to see some overlap. So retirement is the one growing most dramatically right now. So we show this each and every year. It basically just shows the GIC decision and in the contract, the agreement in the PEC in terms of how it affects employees, and this is this delta. So if we had stayed on the historical path, the existing plan that we had, now this assumes we didn't make any benefit design changes, then we would have anticipated that the fiscal 25 health insurance under the old plan versus what it is currently trending at would have created a $15 million difference. So if you had stayed where we were, we would have expected by fiscal 25, which is not far outside of this 5-year plan, we would have seen $15 million more on top of the general fund budget than we were going to see as a result of staying where we are. I mean, that's big numbers. Those are big numbers. I'd say it's 10 to 15%. We had years of 10, years of 20, a lot of 12s. If we got an 8, everybody jumped up and down.
The rate of inflation broke in 2008.
Right.
And it stayed in mid-single digits for about a decade. And nobody knows why. They thought it was because the economy slowed down, but I was at a conference and the people were speculating. Nobody really knows why. So, which makes me look at it every year thinking, geez, is it going to whack back to 11 or 12?
Yeah.
So you got to factor that into the back of your head. That this
so
can't be explained why it's so low.
So the interesting thing is that, pure inflation or health insurance? Just generally inflation?
Health
insurance?
Health insurance.
So the way the GIC works is that the state develops a budget and places in the budget an amount of money for health insurance. It sort of works in reverse to how we used to operate, which is we negotiate percentages, then the health insurance company tells us how much it's going to cost, and then we calculate the two to figure out what we're going to pay. The GIC says, the state says, here's how much we're giving you for funding. And then the GIC only has that amount to spend. And so if the rates came back, because they got rate quotes, at a number which exceeded the amount the state was budgeting, they make benefit design changes to get down to the number. Mm-hmm. And so that methodology of funding health insurance, which is different than how we traditionally funded health insurance, one, they have the leverage of nearly 500,000 people that are in their system, so they actually can negotiate. We couldn't. But two, they address the inflationary pressures when they exist by altering the benefit designs, keeping the cost control in place. So it's not uncommon that we get 4% last year, where we were facing 10, 12 on our self-insured plan. So we were self-insured before. So we had 400, 500 members in a self-insured plan. It just took a couple of large claims, and that plan would go the other way.
It was ridiculous. You can't have an efficient insurance plan with that few members to it. It just doesn't work. I mean, that's a modest-sized company. That's just not enough people. There are a lot of real huge problems with being self-insured. I mean, GIC, millions of people. I mean, the larger the pool, the cheaper the insurance. That's just basic insurance, so.
But then you make that assumption that the inflationary rate of the GIC is going to remain lower than what we see in general terms.
Yes.
Like, that they're always going to strip out benefits within it to keep it at a lower cost? Is that?
Remember how health insurance changed, because we can, I'm old enough to know that, right? So if we get back to a certain point, it was all about getting a card and showing you $5 and moving in and getting everything from, it didn't matter the range. It could have been knee replacement or a cough, and it was $5. And what we all realized was that the only way to manage the expectation was give the consumer more choice, let the consumer realize that they had those choices. That's been the real difficulty. And the way you do that is by altering benefit design to incentivize certain actions, right? That's how everything else works in sort of traditional retail, except we didn't have that model in health insurance. And so one of the things that's happening is it's not strip, it's alter. It's, do you want to go to that specialist? Do you want to go to that particular health plan? Not health plan, but that, you have to stop to think about where your services are going to be provided and where you need them, because there are out-of-pocket costs, and yet there are savings. we did this, and I haven't provided, I'm trying to think if I provided last year. If I did from the time we switched from the GIC till now, is that 5 or 6 years? Somewhere in that range. I actually did a calculation of the health insurance rate at the time we switched, first year GIC, to last year GIC, and put in the average amount of out-of-pocket costs of the employees, because there's more out-of-pocket costs under these plans. And net, the employees are paying less last year in health insurance than they were 5 years ago. Like real dollars. Like if they were paying $5,000 5 years ago, this year they're paying $4,800. And we benefit from that too. So both benefits. Now, does it mean that they're paying $4,000 and coming $800 out of pocket to get to the $4,800? Or you know what I mean? Yes. And so from a perception perspective, that's sometimes hard to sell. Someone says, oh my God, I went to the doctor, I used to get $5. I couldn't get anything done. Now you're nickel and diming me. But that's common in the healthcare industry right now, is changing the consumer's view that what they did was they changed the matrices, and that now everybody has to make those decisions. But I'm able to show that more than on average, but I'll use the term on average, every employee employed by the town of North Andover pays less in health insurance dollars now than when they did 5 and 6 years ago when we went to the GIC. It was 2014, so it's 5 years ago.
They don't just change like, you know, who you can see and who what you see. If they mandate saying if you want this kind of coverage, you have to see your doctor on an annual basis. You have to. You see your doctor on an annual basis, and that's the cheapest thing that you can do. People who go to the doctors on a regular basis are less likely to have the more serious, you know, chronic, awful. And the other incentives they put in, they pay for your health club, your gym membership. They pay for all kinds of preventative medicine. So if they are pushing things into the preventative side, you're less likely to have chronic illnesses, expensive illnesses, and things like that. And those are ways that large insurance pools save everyone money in the long run. That is the theory.
That's the theory.
But
yeah, and it is sometimes a theory. It's fair.
There's not a lot of evidence that shows it works. That's the problem.
Yep.
I mean, you're kind of stuck. You can do nothing, and that's not the right thing to do. Or you can try innovative stuff, but the data's not good on the wellness programs and paying incentives to do things.
Some of it is. There is. I mean, you have businesses. This is kind of get out. There are many businesses who implement on their own changes in employees' behaviors to reduce pre-absenteeism, absenteeism, things like that, so that everybody.
Now we're in the GIC,
so they make more money.
we're in the
Same
huge
thing.
pool. It doesn't really matter how sick North Andover retirees get or
We're
are.
actives. We're actives, yeah.
Our premium increases are about the pool and about the general rate of inflation for our,
Yep.
I mean, I've seen both. Most of the data I've seen is that they do have a short-term benefit. It's the long-term benefit on wellness programs that's really in question. So people, run to go do the thing, and there's an incentive. The long-term benefit, I think that the more salient point to it is that customer now in North Andover, our health insurance customers, have to know each of the plans to understand what's best for them. And that does alter, it's not a wellness equation, it's a altering behavior question. And that is helpful because they have to be more involved in their decisions. Instead of having one plan that was, the $5 and go, they have to think about which plan makes sense for them. In some cases, we have people moving to cheaper plans because they're better for them. And so the consumer choice is helpful, and also understanding that you need to participate in that so that you can understand which out-of-pocket costs relate to you and not. And so like I said, we're finding employees that even with the out-of-pocket costs the vast majority of employees are paying less than they were 5 years ago. And we're also paying less, so it's good, right? It's good for both. So we're paying less. So this is sort of interesting. I did this last year, modified it a little bit. It's sort of our busy slide of a snapshot of some of the things that were done really well. Employee benefits, classroom size, some of good things and challenges, like succession planning. Still challenged with that a little bit, but we'll work on it. Solar pilot and net metering credit arrangements, right? All good. Master planning process, GIC, the OPEB. So there's a combination of challenges and things we're constantly working at. SPED stabilization was a good program. The curriculum fund has turned out to be, it looks like the schools will have more than $500,000 to spend toward curriculum. And you talk about revenue growth. Remember what we did last year? When was that last year? 2 years ago. The time flies, Tim. We removed from our revenue stream an item that we annually budgeted at $250,000 and directed that specifically as a direct funded revenue for schools, specifically to address the curriculum issue. And we did that, two things that happened. One is it incentivized the school to actually chase down every dollar, so that $250,000 became $500,000. And two, when we talk about marginal revenue growth on those things that are not tax revenue, that's removing a $250,000 item directly out of our revenue stream and being able to absorb that and continue to move forward. We're not aware of anybody else that's directing Medicaid reimbursements to a curriculum fund. Okay? So these are the things that we try to get done. We're almost done with the integrated financial planning, which is good. This is a school slide we've shown in the past. Sometimes you see little sort of dovetails to the end of it. It shows the effort by the school department in the last couple of years to achieve their classroom size goal. And we fully expect that going into 2020, a little bit, I hate to tie it to the gas disaster, but getting to about 7% is substantially complete as it relates to classroom goal. That means there is approximately 7.9% of classrooms, if that's possible, which are not at the goal. And let me tell you why I think that is substantially complete. Because if every year you could redraw the margins of where kids went to school, then you could shift where the kids went to school, and that number would be 0. But you can't shift those lines every year, or if you did, the school committee would be voted out of office, right? So when you, so it doesn't mean you don't continue to drive that down. It's true. But if you could shift lines and move kids, you have kids well below that goal, classrooms well below the goal, and some classrooms up. But on the margins, up or down, you could move kids, if it was magic wand stuff, into the classrooms that are well below the goal, and that number would be 0. Now, it doesn't mean you don't strive towards 0, but 0 really means that you're going to have many classrooms below the goal. And below in this case is good, right? And so you could have that, and it doesn't mean that's still not a goal. I think it's just fair to say that 7.9% from sitting at a peak of 53% is pretty substantial stuff. Yep. And so we continue to remain focused on that. This is a really great example of our partnership with the schools. You know, the community embrace the idea of lower classroom size, and I think we're working to achieve that.
A question, you're the wrong one to ask, but I'm asking it anyway. So now we're doing that.
Yep.
I mean, we're doing it for a reason, just for the sake of having smaller class sizes. I think that's really not why we did it. So the ultimate goal is that the education gets better, kids learn more. So are there now long-term goals that, you know, whatever they measure, the, how's it called? I should know it. I have kids in the school. What's the standardized test they do? MCAS. So are we now expecting that? Is that correlated to anything that the school has now internally hope that this is now going up because we're doing that? Or are we looking back in 10 years and say, well, it actually didn't really change anything? The same amount of kids go to college, nothing increased. The MTOC, not the MTOC, the MCAST. I mean, wouldn't that be a disappointment?
Moving them right along.
Wouldn't that be a disappointment if nothing changes, you know, in 10 years from now, after we spend a lot of money doing that and making the class sizes smaller?
Well, as a non-educator, I would say this, that not unlike in communities where we do things for quality of life, I would assume there's such a thing as quality of education. And having, when we divide the sort of, the number of students by the number of resources in the classroom, the number of people in a school, there's got to be an enhancement in some way. I can't tell you what it's going to mean in terms of MCAS scores or Boston Magazine polls, which way too many people focus on. I can tell you that having less students in a school and in a classroom must enhance the classroom experience. Because we're not talking about going from 20 to 2. We're talking about making it an opportunity for one more student. So I don't know how much we're going to be able to measure that, in fairness. I think it is fair to expect that we, as a community like North Andover, want to increase the quality of life / quality of education. And I think this, I've embraced this from the beginning because it just seems logical to me as a non-educator, that this improves the quality of education. Now, whether you want to say that 5 more students out does that, that's for another day or another student. But I think where we were at, it was easy to embrace this concept as improving the quality of education in the community.
On a consistent basis, think younger the kids are, the less students you want in the classroom. There's just no doubt about it.
I'm just joking, maybe in a couple of years, studies come out that bigger class sizes is actually the way to go.
That was called the 70s, Tomas.
Who knows,
That's what we did. Jam with 40 people in a classroom.
It's always chasing a trend, I don't know. So,
I
okay.
don't think,
I think that there's actually there's
Yeah,
scientific research studies that are controlled with data that,
I don't
and
think
I
this
don't
is
know them off the
anything-
top of my head, I'm not an educator,
it's not
but
anything new. It's not anything new. It's not like classrooms with no walls. Now, that was new. We did that. We tried that.
I know,
That
my
was in the
wife-
The
70s.
question though, how are we gonna measure success and measure the outcomes?
I think-
Is it MCAS or college
No,
acceptance?
that
What
is
is the-
absolutely a question for the school committee, and
Yeah.
by the way, they wrestle with that every year, and they try to make their goals and try to, push out, how do we measure? They do it every year. Classroom size is nothing new about classroom
It's
size and the
popular,
relationship.
it's popular with voters, and I think Andrew answered it very well. But Thomas is asking a legitimate question.
Oh,
If you're
he
asking
is.
people to reach into their pockets,
You better
what
believe
do you
it.
get? And
Yes.
it doesn't, it's not as simple.
And
It doesn't simply boil down to better test scores, and you are right, it
You're right.
skews to younger kids, but it's also in poorer communities, you get a better return. I'm not trying a community like North Andover, but the return will be as great.
that's a question for the superintendent when he sits in front of you, is how are you measuring? How do we know?
Just do me a favor when you do that, though. Understand there's two different strata, right? The question's fair, but there's a sort of a principal place to be. It's sort of like saying, do I get more productivity? This may be unfair, but do I get more productivity because the fire stations do? I'm not sure. But I do get a state-of-the-art asset that helps support a state-of-the-art department. If I have a school building that we add value to, it may be really difficult to attribute direct sort of cause and result stuff, cause and effect. But there is an expectation within the community of sort of a basic level of sustainable assets and supportable assets and those kind of things. And I think from my perspective, because I'm not an expert, and I'm probably not going to sit in long discussions about the correlation between all this, and this to me was about walking the classrooms and realize it's just too dense. That really was, so there was that, I visited a lot of classrooms in every school, and this to me was about right-sizing the community to a level. Beyond this, that's a deeper dive for you folks around whether you can really develop the correlation
What's the
between the two.
benchmark for the state for a town our size?
We use a different language.
I mean, the goal is the zero line there, right? So.
Yep. But our goal, so again, these are average.
That's our goal, right?
Yep.
That's not a state goal.
This is a statewide average in elementary. It's 19.6.
Right, I'm just saying, if we're wondering if we're going too far, we haven't even hit the goal yet, and it's been, 10 years. We're not even at the zero line, so.
Yeah, I think that I would reflect slightly different on that. You went from 2014 at 50 to 7.9% 5 years later. That's really aggressive stuff. So I think the pitch is right. I mean, I don't know what the slope of that curve is. Anybody's a geometry major.
No, yeah.
But I think the slope is right. So assuming that 0 is the target, and I would say to you, you really are playing in the margins between 7, 9, and 0, but let's say that 0 is the number. After that, that's to me a different question. I just think that this curve was a community-wide commitment to understanding that we needed to start having the conversation you want to have, but after we're in the game, and I don't think we're in the game before these decisions. I think we're in the game now, and then you can have the discussions about what the sort of every additional decision means. Yep. This got us in the game.
middle school next.
I think we beat this to death. So we're in the process of doing the LED retrofit of the town on streetlights. We're about 33% done right now. It'll take us about a month to get through the rest of that project. Those are long-term, low-maintenance lights that provide energy efficiency, funded almost exclusively by grants, a Green Communities grant. So we adopted the Green Community statute. We brought in close to $500,000 in grant funding through that project, through that effort over the last couple of years. And smart decision. You may recall many years ago we tried to do this and we got all hung up on the whole stretch code thing, and we sort of took a second shot. I don't know when that was. Predates me, 2010, and sort of took a second shot at that. It was a good decision because it opens the door for us to do some pretty exciting things.
There, legitimacy to some comments that I saw in public forums about light pollution caused by LED. I don't know.
The blue light, yeah, I saw that as well.
Is that I don't know. All right.
I'm not aware of, I'm sure there's a study that shows everything.
I agree with that.
I'm not
One
aware
that
of.
is value, is
I'm
worth
not
our
aware of
time.
any such thing.
Okay.
I think almost every community now is moving toward LED for all the right reasons.
Sure. And there's clearly financial benefits.
So this is a foreshadowing onto the CIP primarily. The new senior center, we continue to have conversations about that. Megan will take the lead on the senior center project for us and has been meeting with, we have an architect on board, OPM, committee's working on that. It's some it's just complicated. We're dealing with a residential development sitting next to the senior center. It'll all be fine. It's just stuff we do in the process that'll get us there. It'll all be interesting as we travel through. So that project is due likely to bid in May, June. Yep. We foreshadowing there will be, not unlike last year with the ECC building, I'm adding $750,000 in this year's first year of the CIP toward the senior center. Because generally, if you may recall on the five-year forecast, what was it called? Facility master plan? Back in 2010, when the plan was first developed, the numbers associated with that plan were first developed in 2000. And they first came out as a plan of 2010. The dollar values were assigned to all 7 projects in 2012. That's 8 years ago. And for the first 5 projects, we built in no escalator, which is sort of remarkable, right? So you do 7, 8 years worth of plans, and we didn't build $1 in for escalator. What we find, both on the UCC and on this project, is the construction industry is booming, and everybody wants to get paid. And so we've added $750,000 to be funded out of free cash in year 1 of the CIP to make sure we have sufficient funds to deliver on that project. I'm very comfortable we can handle that well. Jumping down a little bit, we talked about the LET, the OPEB funding. I'll be working with the committee in the next 30 to 60 days to roll out a thoughtful plan that helps us address the funding of that program. Foreshadowing on the capital improvement plan, we're going to roll into Facility Master Plan 2. And the likely expectation, the way I've funded the capital improvement plan, is year 1 will be the sort of assessment piece, which is how we did it last time. Year 2 will be the design of the Franklin School renovation. Year 3 will be the construction of the Franklin School and the design of the Atkinson School. Year 4 will be the construction of the Atkinson School improvements and the design of the Kittredge School. And year 5 will be the funding of the Kittredge School and likely the design of the improvements to Fire Station 2 here on Johnson Street. And we haven't yet determined whether or not there are other pieces to the facility master plan. We're going to look at the library and look at the youth center. I'm not sure what to expect from those, but I wouldn't expect that they are overwhelming numbers. So that's sort of a peek into what we think the assessment's going to tell us and what the capital plan will look like. Denise has taken the lead on the recreation complex in addition to the committee that was formed. We expect to go out to bid on that project in late February, early March. That's the centerpiece of open space projects, I would tell you, in the Commonwealth. It's going to be extraordinary, 16-plus acres. Really exciting plan. There's been 25 public meetings about that particular project. Believe it or not, 25 public meetings. I'm sure we'll have a couple more. But that project is largely complete. The plan is, the same plan we rolled to town meeting with a couple of, tweaks here and there. Everything is on schedule. It'll be 2 phases. Construction will begin probably on the back side of that site over the summer, extend through the winter season. We'll shut it off during the winter. It'll come back, and we'll need the whole second year. This is nearly a 2-year construction project. It's a big deal. In the end, it's really going to be fantastic stuff. Amphitheaters, walking tracks, multiple fields. Where now the last-minute inclusion will be, what do you call them? Parkour type stuff. So you do this sort of routine around, like they'll, if you can't find something. I can't do anything. I walk up the stairs, Chuck, and I'm exhausted. Yeah.
Can I ask you to go back real quick? You just flew through
Sure.
that, and I'm a little bit tired. Franklin School, what year? You're mentioning these items. When will we see actual cost estimates on Franklin, Atkinson, and Kittredge?
Well, we have cost estimates off the original assessment that was done by the schools at the time we did the ECC, so I'm jumping off those. Those will be updated as a function of, so first year is bringing in a consulting firm, as we did in the first facility master plan. A little lighter lift than what they had to do, because they did an assessment of every building, or we've just redone 7 buildings.
Right.
So that work will be done next fiscal year, meaning fiscal '20. I would expect then that as a result of that, we would be looking at the design dollars in year 2 for the Franklin renovations, but very consistent with a document that's already been reviewed and approved by the school committee. That's not, so if anybody
I
wants
just
to know.
haven't seen that. That's public, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, it's been publicly discussed at multiple meetings leading into the,
But it's not in facilities number 2, facilities man. Where do you see those cost estimates then, if it's not in?
I would say to you that the way to see them today would be to go to the school, whatever the document was called. So the school department, under Facility Master Plan 1, before making the decision on the Ann Bradstreet, looked at 4 options. I think there were 1, 2, 3, and 3A.
Okay.
And each of these schools identified in there with a cost estimate and a scope for the projects. What Facility Master Plan 2 contemplates is that that data in that report provides largely the framework of what would be actually constructed. So if you look at that document, which is publicly available through the school department and other resources.
Just look at 1 then, because I was looking at 2 and there's only a $50,000 number, and I'm going off of memory, but there wasn't anything in subsequent years. So go back to 1 and look at those numbers is what you're saying.
No, we're talking about different things.
We're talking about a study that's done relative to all the schools, in particular focusing on a ECC. And they came down to 3 different, was it just 3
Right,
different
I don't know
options?
why it's not in number 2. That's what I'm trying to
What do you
understand.
mean, number 2?
That the cost estimates are not in facilities plan 2.
Of course, yeah. The capital plan released next week will use the assessment done by the school department, the dollars that assessment
Yep,
identifies.
it'll be in that line.
And the CIP that you'll see next week is this is what I'm talking about. In first year, you'll see $50,000 to bring on a consultant to make sure we know what we're talking about.
Yep.
In year 2, you'll see the design of the Franklin School improvements.
All I need to know is it's next week, because the last time I
Yep.
looked at it was a month ago, and there was only 50,000 in 1 year, and the rest of the years were empty. So
No, they were
next
not,
week, they'll be
that's not
updated.
accurate. That's not accurate. They were different numbers, but they were not empty.
Right, and that's not reflective of the study that Andrew's referring to either, so.
No.
Okay.
No, the
I
capital
noticed
plan
that.
last year had dollars in there, but there were estimates on, we hadn't got to the point of sort of thinking we knew the priority. So last year, we made estimates. I think we assumed last year that the order was different. This is based upon the school committee's sort of vote on what the order should be. And
Yep.
so last year, the numbers were different, but we did have funding in each year after the second year. I don't recall the numbers off the top of my head. This year's numbers will reflect those options based on the assessment done by the school committee. No, you have to look at the actual full capital plan, the dollars are in there. So anyway, so that's the capital plan. The recreation complex is up and running. We're expecting to deliver in the next 12 months or so on a comprehensive sidewalk connectivity plan. Yep,
Just one quick on the recreation complex.
yes.
So when we discussed it last year, unfortunately I wasn't there, but there's a fairly big portion of private raising for, funding this project. I know it's not due for a while, but still, it's 1.2 million, I believe.
125.
125.
Yeah.
So how is that going? I mean, might there be a risk that this is not bringing it, through these private fundraising?
No, I think we're okay. I mean, I think
So
we're okay.
but it's for me, it's a kind of an unfund,
That's
and
fine.
risky.
No, it's not risky at all. So the idea here is I know I keep on repeating it, but I don't think anybody is, I think you all do. But when this project, it's just really hard to imagine, like, if you've ever seen something of this, this is transformative. So because it's transformative and there was so much benefit community-wide, I think it's an example of how we do a few things a little bit differently. You want to use the plan, if we're going to ask the CPC to contribute X, if we're going to ask taxpayers to contribute Y, then guess what? Then there should be skin in the game for others. And that was the concept behind asking other folks to sort of pitch. This is a community build in like the grandest scale ever, right? And so it was an opportunity for the community to sort of participate. I will trust they'll get their job done. I have to be cautious because I can have no involvement on the state ethics codes and anything to do with fundraising. So I'll ask, how's it going? I asked the same thing you did. I think we'll be fine.
On a much, much smaller scale. That's why we have a youth center. The youth center was built with private funds.
No, I agree fully, and
Yeah.
we should
Yeah,
be able as a community.
yeah.
But
I think
just
it's-
in case the community doesn't wake up
Yeah.
and nobody wants to take the lead,
Coming to your house.
you know, how would we close the gap? I mean,
Yep.
I mean, you're basically 80% done until that money needs to be in there. I mean, you're not gonna
You're not wrong.
take it down and, you know, or leave it. as
So without being sort of
construction site.
goofy and fresh about it, so there's two components of the $1,250,000. One expectation is that there's been an annual contribution made by all the youth leagues here to maintain our fields. It's something that started many years ago. I wouldn't say it's unique, but it's really a good program, and I have to really recognize the Fields Committee and the boosters and the individual leagues whose parents contribute every year to invest in some level to the fields. There's some belief that some of those dollars, of which I believe there's a little close to $250,000 still remaining in one of those funds. And so there's an expectation of that $1,250,000, that close to half a million of the $1,250,000 will come from that sort of individual,
One time.
that kind of fundraising. And I think, so in that sense, they're already halfway there to that component's goal of $500,000 with, following, I think it's the right thinking, if the construction completes by the end of 2020, and we're holding back contingency, then technically somewhere around the 1st of 2021 is when you need that money. That's still 2 full years off. So I think that first component of the $1,250,000, the $500,000, I think they'll easily achieve. Then the focus needs to turn to more larger scale corporate type development of $750,000. I think that's very doable, having been involved in some of those projects in the past. If you took, 20 businesses and saw that as, $35,000 each in some kind of level, you're really close to those kind of dollars. I think it's very doable, and I think that there are people talking about it and working on it. And I think there needs to be a little more talk and work, but I feel comfortable that they can get done. I'll let you know when I'm worried about it.
Well, who would step in?
I do
the
think,
town,
and also as it relates to fundraising, so if you've ever been involved in fundraising, let's do the backside of that field, and all of a sudden people start realizing what's coming out of the ground in a very positive way, and maybe we can get people on the backside of the field and using it, and everybody says, wow, this is really cool, how do I involve myself? So sometimes seeing the asset rather than two-dimensionally on a piece of paper really helps the fundraising effort, and I think this is one of those cases. Field of Dreams. This is it. This is so it. It's like,
There's the slogan.
But I know from some, I remember the Franklin playground. I think the requirement was that the parents first raise $50,000, and then when this is done, then the playground will be built, and not the other way around. We build a playground and assume the money will be raised eventually. I mean, if we had come up with 1.2 million, if the community is strong enough to come up with that 1.2 million, then we'll start building.
well, I think.
I mean, I see
It's
this as a risk for the town, because
Yeah, I'm
the
not sure.
town at the
I'm
end
sure.
holds the bag, right?
Well, probably.
Yeah.
But I don't see that. I think I looked at it completely differently, which is, I believe with the support that this particular project got, we could have asked for the full amount. I think this is a little bit of a litmus test. We could have, we're capable of having asked for the next $1.2 million. I think this was a little bit of a litmus test for folks to understand the significance of the project on their community and for those people who participate and use it. I saw it as an opportunity, quite frankly, because I think when we presented the budget, I guess I could have filled the gap with $1,250,000. I think it's an opportunity, and most people embrace that. It's an opportunity for the community to not just talk about a project, but invest in a project. And I saw it because I do think that first $500,000 of the $1,250,000 will be substantially raised by the end of this year. I don't think there's any issue to that. I think the $750,000 is an opportunity to get the corporations. Did you work for a large company? Sorry. I saw it as an opportunity to engage. We don't often do that here. We don't often enough engage our corporate partners in the kinds of initiatives that can be transformative. And I saw that as an opportunity. So I encourage folks to take that on. I can't have an involvement on it, but I encourage folks. They seem to feel like they're positioning themselves to do that, and I think it's an opportunity that it's a true community builder, not just the youth leagues are involved and seniors are involved, but the corporate culture here is involved in investing in the community. I think we all saw that as an opportunity, and I still think it is an opportunity.
I think so too. Hopefully we're not disappointed. Okay. Let's move on.
I appreciate that.
One different unrelated question, but
Yeah.
the slide seems to be missing any comment about the middle school and MSBA application. And is that just because it's not, we don't know when that is in our future based on our status? Is that kind of the thought process? Or should we start talking about it?
I certainly have publicly endorsed the need for the expansion and renovation of the middle school. The Board of Selectmen have done the same. School committee, everybody's done that. I think it's just in this picture, it's really neutral from my perspective as it relates to a 5-year forecast or to a capital plan.
Okay.
Because I see it as an MSBA project. It's just too big not to be an MSBA project. So from my perspective, it doesn't sit here because it's neutral to that. But omitting it doesn't mean that I don't support it. I continue to support that project.
So when you say, do you see it only as an MSBA project? Like there's, that is, at what point does that no longer, does that scale tip a little bit, or does it not tip at all?
I think applying once and being put on a shorter list, not the short list,
Yeah.
is not sufficient traction to sort of move to a plan where the taxpayer pays 100% of the middle school.
Understood.
Yep, that's my view. I think, so I'm not sure, that's a complicated question. I don't know how many years. I do appreciate the fact that the MSBA thought the project was, there was enough merit in the project to move it out of the sort of, the sort of initial phase into a faster phase. I haven't heard the final word this year, and that may be the case as well. It tells me the MSBA takes seriously the need to renovate the middle school and expand the middle school. And so that's a really difficult question as to when. For some reason, we move backwards somewhere in the MSBA project phase. I could see that being the case. But so far, the MSBA signals are that it's a when, not if. And so just a question of whether or not the sentiment about that changes.
Okay.
I feel today it's a when, not if.
Okay.
And given the impact, not doing that and going to the ratepayer and taxpayer and telling them they're going to fund the whole thing, if we can't answer the question you just asked, like, is this really the time to ask now? Makes it, not tenable unless we can really answer that question, right? So I'm not ready at this point.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anything else?
Here it is. Remember, Stan helped me write this.
Yeah. Oh, I thought that was the planning guy.
It's good. Well, we certainly appreciate your continued support, and we know that you guys have challenges to get through. We will, we're prepared over the next couple of months to make sure we provide you with a thoughtful and detailed CIP and budget, and stand ready to help however we can to make sure you can get through your deliberation process.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Cool.
Thank you.
Megan. Thank you.
He sat here with talk about painful. They got to sit and listen to me for 2 hours. They're on long-term contracts, so that they can. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
I like the cuts. Whoever gave the trees for the cuts.
Yeah, cute, huh?
It's very nice.
It's Angela. She's the best.
She is. I sort of blew that timeline budget, but anyways, we did miss which I can't forget, a public comment period. We do have a person in the audience. Stan, you don't have to. It's if you do want to come up for a few minutes, but that's up to you. But otherwise, we'll move on.
You can decline.
I just want to say, one comment. I can't help it because you know me. Stanley Lippert, 43 Stonecliff Road. Was that an amazing performance or what?
Oh yeah.
Is that guy? Are we the luckiest town in the world to have that guy running it? Whew, man, oh man, that's the best. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan.
That's all I wanted to say.
Well said. We've talked a lot about, we've actually did a great overlay of this coming fiscal year's budget in that presentation. You guys asked a lot of great questions, so thank you very much. Liz, if you want to make a few comments relative to the revenue part of our revenue and fixed cost review committee.
Sure. We met twice, and revenue projection this year is $100,912,338. That projected revenue is up 3.8% from fiscal year 19. Overall, that's a total up of almost $3.7 million. As Andrew already pointed out, most of that is made up of, new growth, $650,000 in new growth, and that's kind of stable. She always estimates $650,000 in new growth, but the interesting thing of note is that new growth this year is 1.1 million. So, the question would be, gee, why don't we just budget more new growth and have more revenue? But again, to Andrew's point, we don't count what we really can't foresee being a continual source of revenue. And because that 1.1 is sort of a timing spike and things aren't necessarily going to continue at that level, Lynn sticks at the $650,000 as the new growth number. And that's, again, why we can close that gap, is because she approaches things and they approach things so conservatively in terms of counting the money that's coming in.
Is that 1.1 really just a one-off, or is that every year?
It's been pointed as more of a one-off.
More of a one-off.
That's why it's only
What's the reason for that? Do we know?
We had some apartment buildings and
Yeah.
condominiums come on board.
And
Is
a
it
lot
on
of it was timing
114?
too, the way the permits got pulled. The way the permits got pulled, that's when you count it as new growth. So some of it was timing. Things got pulled earlier than they expected them to. So things fell into this fiscal year that we might have expected to have gone out to next fiscal year.
So you're saying that maybe we paid for our snow and ice?
Let's hope so. The motor vehicle excise tax is up slightly, meals tax up slightly, interest income. So, most of that increase in revenue is, we know where it's coming from, and we're being conservative about how we're treating it. Let's see. I guess that's about it. We really don't. Motor vehicle excise tax. That is one thing that Lynn did bump up, which she typically doesn't do. She bumped that up by $200,000 because it has been trending now for 5 years on an increase. So she took a risk and bumped that up, and that's that's the only thing she's not. And that's even conservative. Fixed costs we'll get to after the new year. They'll have those settled somewhere around the end of December, and we'll meet.
Why after December?
I forget.
I'll tell you.
You tell me.
I was setting
You're
up
setting me up.
It was a softball you missed. The state, we're waiting for the state's final assessments, and they won't come until after the year ends. So that's the reason.
Yeah. So we'll meet shortly after the new year and get fixed costs settled. That's about all there is to report from revenue and fixed cost.
Just one question. And the fees for all these little services, who's actually setting these? And is this on a yearly base, or is that, how much that probably is,
You get a bill for that every year.
No, but who sets the fee? For example.
Oh, who sets that?
Now I had to, to get rid of my leaves, I realized I have to get a $10 permit. And which is fine, I'm just wondering who is. We can set these, right? This is within the town. Is it the selectmen?
The MVET is set by the state based on appraised values of the cars and rates. And
I'm just wondering about the general
But
process and who can set it and how we set it, and
Board of
I mean
Selectmen.
that could be also an impact on the revenue. I mean, if we increase.
Permitting and things
Like
like
official,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
if it, like anything you'd pull it to town clerk's office,
Any-
you mean,
any
like
fees,
a,
yeah,
like a
any
dog
fees,
license
yeah.
or anything like
Any-
that.
Or
any
fees
fees.
to the planning board, things like
Any
that.
any
Yeah.
fees,
The
any.
board of
Yeah.
selectmen.
The Board of
Yeah,
Selectmen
yeah,
sets
yeah.
all that.
Yeah.
And they have done some selective increases over the last couple of years. I think one in building permits, if I recall, so.
Yeah, I always find it shocking when we make $40,000 from dog licenses. Wow.
I mean, it's in that, and
Who
that's why
knew?
they're able to waive, like during the crisis with the gas, they were able to waive inspection fees and things like that, you know.
But, that said, that's not lost. We're waiving it, but we're going to charge Columbia Gas.
Yes, yes.
For those fees.
But I mean, but the Board of Selectmen had to waive it for the individual homeowner, et cetera, et cetera. There are all kinds of fees and that they just said, okay, we're not gonna be worrying about collecting these now. And you're right, and the buck is gonna be passed on to Columbia Gas. Yeah, there's a lot of revenue pieces that are gonna have to be pushed along to
Yeah,
Columbia
Lynn had
Gas.
said in one of our meetings that she had billed, what, $272,000 just that morning for road details for police officers. Yeah, I mean, for a month.
$1,000 for the road repair. I mean,
Oh, I think it was $1.5 million.
yeah.
150 million,
$150
150 million.
Over,
Yeah.
over 3 towns, but.
Yes, over 3 towns. Yeah, I was
So
thinking just for
call it
us.
50 million or 35 million or
Right.
25 million, that's a lot
Yeah,
of money.
It's
lot of money.
insane.
Yep.
Yeah. One of the interesting questions I had for her as well was, I was curious if the loss of business was going to hurt our meals tax revenue. Because I thought, wow, some of these businesses have been closed, maybe we're
That's a
gonna have
really good
lower.
question.
It's actually increased. People can't cook, and also all the workers. Right, because the restaurants were closed, so I was worried about that, but she said the restaurants that are open are booming because all the
Yeah.
workers are coming in to get their lunches and stuff. So actually, we've seen no
Oh,
drop.
I didn't even consider that.
We've
That's
seen
true. We have
no
a huge
drop.
population of people who had to get their
Yeah,
lunches and
that
dinners
don't live
somewhere.
here,
Oh,
that are
that's
coming
right.
in and spending. So, I was really happy to hear that we didn't, there's actually a net
In
bit of a bump.
In tragedy again.
Yes,
Yeah.
seriously.
Yeah. So fun facts from the Revenue and Fixed Costs Committee.
Andrew spoke, Andrew did speak about the tax rate classification during his presentation. There is a packet for everybody to go through, but the purpose of the meeting, the Board of Selectmen approved a 1.36 factor, was really, it's a shifting between the amount of taxes that the residents pay and commercial pay. That's pretty much it. They have an estimated $5.2 billion in assessed values. They have it broken down between residential and CIP. They figured out how much property tax that they should expect in total. And they start out with a baseline of roughly I got this right here. $14.28 per square foot. And all they're doing is shifting that so that the commercials pay a little bit more and the residents pay a little bit less. And and that is really all you really have to know. More than welcome to go through all the detail, but that's really what that's all about. I think you did a good job of saying, I don't know how it all started, the political stuff behind it, but it's there. The other part, too, is that you may have read in the papers is that there's residential homeowners will receive a property tax reduction. That's true. It's only because the shifting of the property values went enormously more towards apartments and condominiums in the current year than the residential. And the example I have for you is that residential property types increased assessed values for single-family homes 6.7%. Condominiums 18%, two families 18.5%, 3 families 24.2%, multi-use residence 22.5%, and apartments 54.4% increase in assessed value. That's what's happening. It's a shifting of the dollars, not increased property taxes, just a shifting of those dollars.
Wasn't there also something that dropped off debt that impacted? Yeah, there was something that dropped off debt that would have, it was the debt override stuff,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So that impacted
$1.2
the
million.
tax.
That impacted.
Okay.
But that doesn't really have anything to do with it.
No, it doesn't have anything.
No, because there's a difference between and please correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that helps me think about it is there's the assessed value of your property,
Yes.
and then there's the rate at which you are taxed, right? So those are different things.
Yes.
And so what they voted on was the rate in which you're taxed between residential and commercial. So those rates went down because we had to adjust them because we no longer have debt service payments of $1.2 million, correct?
Right.
So, but what was voted on was the allocation, so like if you had just taken that 1.2 million out and you had come to what that should be from FY 19, right? That those numbers would have been different than what was actually voted on. And they actually increased a little bit more of what the residential rate would be, right? Compared to the commercial. Yeah. And so the concern, insubstantial, it was not significant, but it was changed.
Actually, the commercial property tax amount they'll be paying has actually gone down, again, because of an overall shifting of dollars.
Everyone's, both have, but the divide between the two, like if you had taken.
Yes, I think you're right.
Yeah, so if you had taken whatever the number was, right, before, and you had to readjust it because we no longer have $1.2 million in debt service payments, the allocation of that reduction between residential and commercial was not the exact same as it was the year before. They decided to shift that somewhat.
Yes,
right?
they did change it. Yes.
To favor commercial.
Yes.
Yes.
That's what the heated debate was about.
Right, but then there's also the additional concern of the assessed values changing, and because property values of condos and multifamily buildings have gone up substantially, there is some concern that even though at the same assessed value, that number is not significant. It's like $20 or $30, right, between what was proposed and what eventually was voted on. Because at the same time your assessed value goes up, that number is magnified. Am I saying that all right? Okay.
The houses the properties values that increased in value are paying more at a lower rate. And that's because the assessed value went up. That's the bottom line. So they're taking more of a chunk of the properties.
because the road is done.
Yes.
Okay.
So
They're still paying less.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Anybody have any data on real estate values since these fires?
I don't know.
Like year over year, are they down?
I wouldn't know.
I don't know that you would have that data out yet, right? Because it just happened
There's been dozens of homes traded since in the last 60 days.
I don't know if
Yeah.
Rosemary Smedley would be the one to ask or not, because she's got a little bit of a finger in it.
Oh, I know.
Plus social impact.
I think if it looks like your town has bad infrastructure, it's bad for your real estate values.
I kind of have to feel the same way. That's the first thing I thought of. I mean, who knows how it'll even out, but the first thing I thought, anybody who had their house up for sale on Main Street, there were considerable properties.
You now have better infrastructure than you ever had.
Yeah,
so-
but people are frightened by Columbia Gas.
Do
No,
we?
I mean,
Do we?
it's-
All we've known is woken up to what we didn't, these risks that we.
I mean, I'm curious. I would
So
be
you're saying
interested
that
to see
our
those
revenue
numbers.
may drop next year because assessed values may drop.
I bet
because
you
the
most of
gas-
our home values on Zillow have dropped in the last 60 days.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I don't know, and we're gonna move on.
Yeah, maybe.
The next thing on the agenda
It is
was.
70% of our revenue.
No, I was just gonna say, it's a very good point. It's valid to bring
83%.
up in another meeting.
Yep.
I think you're right.
Next meeting is on January 8th. At that time, before then, we're going to be having the CIP, Capital Improvement Plan, that will be presented by Andrew. The actual document is coming out next week, I believe. So we should get is it possible for hard copies to be made available? Angela, people want to stop by and pick them up at Town Hall?
I'll let everybody know. Lynn usually gives them to me, and I'll send out an email and just let you know
Perfect.
that we have them, okay?
Perfect.
You just stop by there and come up. Awesome.
I'll send an
Are we on
email.
the 3 Sasha's at the school meeting with you? Or no?
And then we have a school budget where like the school committee meeting is on January 3rd, where it's being presented to the school committee, the budget is. And then there is a public forum, public hearing. I just had that. The school committee holds a public hearing on January 17th, and then they approve the budget on January 31. So, like to get some feedback from their January 3rd presentation on the school budget for who is planning on attending.
Did you just say the 17th? There's a
The
public.
17th is the public hearing, but the 3rd, it's
What time is that? I don't have that on my schedule, but again, I can't see the school calendar for 2019.
so January 3,
I
2019.
have that.
Again, was the superintendent submits it to them, which probably will provide an outline, discussion, whatever.
My question is there a school meeting on the 17th?
That's what the document I have
I
before me
can't
said.
find that online, so do you
I
have?
can't speak to that.
Okay.
It's right here.
That's what I'm saying. Okay, it's not backed up.
And then the school committee is scheduled to approve it on the 31st. So I'd like to be able to discuss something on our meeting of the 8th. So I got
Well,
Jen.
are you going to the 3rd? I'm going to the 3rd. I had that booked out.
Yeah,
But Sasha, are you
yeah.
going, one of the two of you?
Well, why don't we can just, between us three, we'll coordinate and make sure at least one
I'm
or
just
two
telling
people
you
is at
now,
every
I'm
meeting.
going.
You know what I would have, is like, can we get just a little email saying, school committee meeting is on these dates?
So I can
I've
help
already
with
asked
that.
for the list of school committee meetings, Angela, and I've not received a reply, and it's not online, so we need a list of the school committee dates. Could you?
I'll talk to Michelle,
Thank
because
you.
and ask her, you want to know all the school committee did?
Yes, please.
I mean, I'm sure they're fairly consistent, but I've got no, it's so easy
No,
for me to
some are in the
go.
morning now, some are at night.
Oh, I know, they just had one in the morning.
And
Is
that's
that
why
a?
I need to know on the
Wait.
17th, because I have other commitments now. I didn't know that the.
I thought that was an aberration, just having one in the morning.
No, there's been some inside of schools during the morning. They're switching it up a little.
So let's find out when the meetings will be.
Yeah, what we based our calendar on was whatever was published at the time. So I can go in and adjust that, and I'll coordinate that, and we'll make sure everyone's there.
Again, if it's in the evening, which, if it's in the morning, forget it, I won't be there. I will be at work. But if it's in the evening, I mean, literally, it's 300 steps from my house, so.
Perfect.
Easy. Any meetings, in the town hall is not here, I'm sorry, wrong place, but very close. More than that, yes, that's.
I was gonna say it's more. I was like,
I'm
thinking in
thinking
my
town
head,
hall.
and I was like, that's more than 300 steps.
No.
Chris,
All right.
big steps.
Big steps, I take really big steps, right, okay.
Thank you, Sasha, to keep me informed as far as people attending or not. And I'll coordinate with Angela relative to the CIP book, making sure that we get the thing.
I'm going to talk to Lynn tomorrow.
Okay.
If she gets them.
Wow. Next on the agenda is draft finance committee. They're not published yet. They're not final yet. You got something in your inbox, but Jen, I noticed that I actually meant to send out redlined. I know you'd like the red line that says whatever. If anyone wants a red line version, what the status of this is, it's actually in legal counsel right now. The policies and procedures. So, if anyone's, that's the status of them, and when they when they,
Well, there was a couple things we were gonna
Thank you.
talk about.
Is there any possibility to make any changes?
absolutely, so if you have some things you want to make a change,
Actually, there is one small item.
go for it.
Go for it. Okay, item E, under Rules of Procedures and Voting. And it talks to the formal minority reports. And if you've seen, it hasn't happened in every town meeting, but it's often in town meeting that there's a minority report if a board is, split in their opinion on something. And the minority report is significant because it's put in the town meeting warrant. It is a significant amount of information. It's not nothing. And I think that we should obviously be allowed to have a minority report, but I think that it should be more than two people, seeing as this is a 9-member board, to drive a minority report. I think if you have, it should be enough of an opinion. I think it should be 3 people. I think it should be at least a third of the committee. So it's not, it's less of an aberration and more of a significant opinion.
So 3 people have to agree to have a minority report, or
Correct.
what the contents of the minority report say?
Well, if it's a minority opinion, so say, you're voting
Yeah.
on whether,
Not the
the
majority.
walls should be blue or green.
Yeah.
And it's like, most people, we want them blue, But 3 people are like, no, they
So
really
3
should
people
be
have to
green.
be on the content of the minority report,
Yeah.
not on the fact that there is one. Okay.
Yeah, no, that,
Makes
exactly,
sense.
because there's not always going to be anybody who, even if there's if it's
I
a
understand.
split vote, you might not have anybody saying that I want my opinion put on the warrant. You're not going to have that. But if someone decides, I want my opinion on it, they can't just have one other person agree with them, it should be on it. He has to have, or he or she has to have 2 other people agree. There should be 3 people who are saying this opinion should be in it. That's what a change that I would like to see.
I think that's fair.
Do you know how many, I guess I haven't done my research on this, but I would like to understand in other committees, policies, and procedures if they have a minority report and what their required vote is, because I agree with you, 3 at least.
Well, the thing is what other committees would you see that on? You see things written from
Planning
the
board?
planning board. There's only 5 people on the planning board.
Fair.
There's 5 people, but this is a little different. There's 9 of us.
I like the idea of 3 myself, but I also do like to do a little bit of research. I look
Fair.
at the Massachusetts finance policy and procedures as well as pass it by legal counsel.
Yep, that's fair.
So I think it's a great idea. Does any other opinions? I think it's fair.
Yeah, and the only thing
It-
is because it's a huge impact when something is written on the warrant. It's not a throwaway thing. It's a big deal.
By blue paint, you mean marijuana?
Yeah. No, I really was trying to think of
Get
something
your
pretty
mind.
simple. But yeah,
What's the analogy?
but that's
Blue
the
paint.
most current one. That
Green
isn't the
paint.
only one that I've seen, but yeah, you're right. I wasn't alluding to that. But that is the most
Okay.
current minority report we've seen. It doesn't happen every time.
Yeah.
I was all for green.
Are there any other comments or thoughts on?
Yeah, I didn't have well, now that we have the red line, I just want to compare the conversations that we had in the last meeting to the.
It's all in the red line. No,
But that's what I mean, so just for
I will pass that out again.
It's Mr.
when-
Mailer's red line, which is now black.
Actually, I meant to send, this is the one I meant to send out.
Yeah, I don't like it look red. Hey, look bad.
Yeah.
I made it black.
I like that. I thought that was funny.
I'm
want-
not taking those parentheses off.
Yeah, that's
You
I thought
want-
maybe that was going a little too far.
Yeah. I made all the negative numbers positive.
Again, it's before legal counsel, so I'm not sure what Susan will have on it. But you know,
Yeah, isn't it nice having in-house counsel?
The man out of jail.
hey, what, sir?
You took the man out of jail.
Took the man out of jail?
Chair.
Out of
Chair.
Sorry, they said jail. I was like, I did.
This is,
I
no, I'm
did.
just going for the red line.
I'm
Yeah,
trying to be,
yeah no, it's
Today.
just like, it's just, we should be modern, yeah. We should be going with the times, you know. The times is there's no man in jail.
just, if you, whatever. The restructured draft finance committee report, I'm sorry, I just lost energy. It isn't there yet. But I'll be candid with you. I'm looking for the first sheet. As people are opening up their town meeting warrant book, I want the first sheet to be everything that they really need to know about the budget. It's a tearaway sheet. That's, to me, is the ideal. And getting away from the style of an executive formal document report to something that's more readable, people want to read. We'll go, wow, what a breath of fresh air. That's the goal that I'm looking for. And so what I actually started doing, I do have a document going where I've got half on one side what the document used to look like, and then proposal on the other side. I've got that part done. I have that completely blank. So. It's like rewriting the whole darn thing again, but that's about it. Any other comments on that? We do have minutes from the prior meeting. Comments, discussions on the minutes?
Do we hear a motion?
I move that we approve the meeting minutes for the meeting of October 23rd, 2018, as written.
Any discussion? Do I have a second? Second. We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. I don't think you can vote on it. I can't, but
Because you weren't here. And that's all I have for tonight, other than, again, there will be an agenda coming out for the meeting that we have planned for the 8th. That could be a busy meeting, too. And I'll try to do better relative to my timelines. Oh, my, yeah, not.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
That'd be Liz. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Thank you very much, all.